Walking down the dimly lit hallway, Keith smiled fondly as he recalled Nana's reluctance to let him go when he dropped her home. She had wanted him to stay over, but he gently refused. It was already late, and he chose not to disturb her mother. However, he promised to pick her up in the morning to take her to the university. A slight frown creased his brow as he realized he had missed an entire week of classes. He likely had a couple of pending assignments. Taking out his phone, he scrolled through his messages and found a few from Qingwei. She had sent pictures of her latest calligraphy work, and he stopped to admire her skill. "You are brilliant," he texted back, adding a smug emoji. "But I'll catch up to you and surpass you one day." A reply came almost instantly. "Thank you." Qingwei sent the same smug emoji. "Bring it on." Then another text followed. "I'm looking forward to our next game of chess." Keith smirked as he typed. "Want to lose that badly?" "No, I want to beat you that badly," she shot back. "By the way, have you completed your weekly assignments?" "Not yet. I was just about to ask a friend about them. There's one on international trade. I wrote 2 essays for it. If you want, I can submit the second one under your name." She added, "The second assignment is for accounting and finance." The professor assigned different questions to everyone. You need to prepare a cash flow statement, a trial balance, and a balance sheet. That's all for last week. "Thank you," Keith replied. "I'll take that second essay of yours. As for the accounting and finance assignment, I'll check the question on the LMS and finish it in the morning. Don't take it lightly. It will take some time to complete." Qingwei responded quickly. "No worries about the essay. I'll submit it in a few minutes and send you a copy." "Thanks again. I'll see you tomorrow, Qingwei." "Good night." "Good night, Keith." Keith glanced at her reply before pocketing his phone. As he reached his room, he was surprised to find that Ying was not standing outside, where she usually kept guard overnight. Pushing open the door, he immediately understood why. Vanessa sat cross-legged on his bed, dressed in floral silk pajamas, a large photo album resting on her lap. Her delicate fingers traced the images with a fond smile. She barely acknowledged his arrival, only glancing at him before returning to her trip down memory lane. The album contained photographs spanning his childhood to adulthood, capturing moments of love, laughter, and growth. Keith's heart warmed at the sight of her smile. He sighed inwardly and stepped into the dressing room to change into his sleepwear. When he returned, Vanessa spoke without looking up. "You took your time dropping off your lovebird." "We went to the movies," he replied, chuckling as his eyes landed on an open picture. Milo was so cute back then. The image showed him as a child playing in the pool with Milo, the once lazy mountain lion cub. Back then, the big cat had loved the water, but now it preferred to avoid it altogether. "So were you." Vanessa smirked. "Hey," Keith protested. "I'm still just as cute." "No, you're not." She shook her head firmly. "You never kept secrets from me as a child." His smile faltered, and a sharp pang of guilt settled in his chest. Lowering his gaze, he fell silent. Minutes passed in quiet as Vanessa continued flipping through the album, while Keith sat beside her, guilt sinking deeper into his bones. Then she spoke. "Do you think I would ever harm you?" Her voice was calm, but Keith sensed the underlying apprehension. "No," he answered without hesitation. "No one could ever love me more than you do, Mother. You would never harm me." Her body trembled slightly at his words, and he instinctively wrapped his arms around her. "Then why, Keith?" she whispered. "Do you know how much it hurts a mother when her child hides things from her, things that could endanger their life and happiness? I do it to keep you safe, to spare you from unnecessary burdens." He pressed a kiss to her head, holding her tighter. "I love you, and I want to protect you." "That's not how it works, my love." Vanessa sighed, leaning into his embrace. "Secrets hurt." "I know," Keith admitted, "but some things must remain secret simply because they are meant to be." Vanessa frowned, contemplating his words. "When did you start cultivating?" "Friday morning, 9 days ago." "What?" She jolted upright, staring at him in shock. "Ow! I got my hands on something that allowed me to complete the Foundation Profound Realm in one go." Her eyes narrowed. "Did you do something irredeemable?" "No, Mother." He met her gaze. "I value my life far too much." "And just like that, you obtained a medicinal inheritance?" she questioned suspiciously. Keith smirked. And just like that, I got my hands on this as well. He lifted his right hand, drawing her attention to his ring finger. A strange band-like ring materialized, runes pulsing faintly. Wisps of darkness coiled from his hand, eventually forming into a flickering black flame. Vanessa's breath hitched. What is that? Darkness, one of the fundamental elements of nature and the primal element of chaos, he explained. The ring is a godstone, an artifact linked to the gods. Gods, she echoed. Keith nodded. This one is the legacy of Erebus, the god of darkness. Vanessa's eyes widened. The primordial deity of the Greek pantheon? Myths hold fragments of truth, but reality is far greater. Keith's voice softened. I am the inheritor of the original Erebus, which means he no longer exists, not as we define existence. A tense silence followed. There are others like me, inheritors of different gods, he continued. Because of my status, I have unknown allies and enemies alike. Vanessa's expression darkened. I won't let anyone take you away from me, Keith. Not even the gods. He chuckled at her audacity, yet warmth filled his heart. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her lips. No one will take me from you, not even the gods. Show me your hand, she demanded after their lips parted. Mother, show me. Sighing, Keith removed his glove. Vanessa carefully unwrapped the bandages, her hands trembling as the final layer fell away. Mist formed in her eyes as she traced the two scars, one in the center of his palm, the other running across his fingers. Though mostly healed, they pained her to look at. Did it hurt? She whispered. A little, Keith admitted, but it was more of an irritation. The scars won't last. They better not, or I'll scar myself the same way, she warned. Keith's eyes darkened. If you do that, I won't speak to you again. Vanessa scoffed, then lunged at him, pulling him into a tight embrace. I want to hold you to sleep tonight. He let her do as she pleased, his face buried in her warmth. Sleep soon took hold as she placed gentle kisses on his head. I love you, he whispered. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. I love you more than you could ever love me, my love. Did you finish your accounting assignment? Qinghua asked as she settled into the seat beside him. Her striking gray eyes studied him curiously before a faint smile formed on her lips. You look unusually refreshed. Did something good happen? Just had a good sleep last night, Keith replied honestly before nodding. Finished and submitted it before breakfast. I convinced my grandfather to play chess with me every evening, she said playfully. Good for you. Hopefully, that means you'll give me a challenge next time we play, or else it'll be too boring. He smirked before glancing toward the classroom door, where a group of boys entered, chatting excitedly. Keith, a plump boy called out, trotting toward him with a broad grin. James arrived first, followed by the rest of their group, Hal, Eric, Glenn, and Max. What surprised Keith was the presence of Julian and his best friend, Gareth, who walked in alongside them, engaged in a seemingly pleasant conversation. You missed another brilliant night, Keith. James announced the moment he reached him. Keith chuckled and stood up to hug the boy. I'm sure I did. So what happened? An entourage from Delvon City showed up to participate in our racing competition last night. James exclaimed enthusiastically. And their leader was good. How good? Keith asked, intrigued. Not as good as you, but still impressive, James admitted. We lost a few races at first, and tensions were high. Those guys from Delvon were getting cocky, calling us and our city out. Things could have turned into a brawl if Julian hadn't brought his guards. What happened next? We tried to reach you, but your phone was off. Yeah, my grandfather returned home last night, so I was with him. Keith offered an easy excuse, one James wouldn't question. We were really under pressure. Even Julian was a little nervous after watching the footage of the earlier races, James continued. But in the end, he decided to step in. By now, the group had fully gathered. Julian casually took a seat at the desk next to Keith, offering him a nod in greeting. And I assume everything turned out well? Keith asked, returning the nod. Yes, James shouted, making Eric chuckle. You should have seen their faces when Julian beat their leader by a yard, winning 10 million Eris. It was the most exhilarating race ever. The rest of the group nodded in agreement. The footage is being edited now, Hal informed Keith. I'll send it to you later so you can see how intense it was. We recorded everything, even their dumb expressions. James added, laughing. Keith smirked. I can't wait to see it. Then, glancing between Hal and Julian, he teased, 10 million, huh? You never bet more than $500,000 when you race me. I'm not foolish enough to throw away my money, Julian admitted without hesitation. So, where were you last week? Out of the city, Keith said with a feigned sigh. Had my hands full. That explains the glove on your left hand? Eric joked. Keith nodded. Got hurt in the process. Doing what? Max asked curiously. Learning how to cook. Keith smirked as their expressions briefly flickered with shock before realizing he was joking. Then, with a casual air, he added, Since everyone's here, I'd like to formally invite you all to my wedding on December 31st, 2040. What? The entire group erupted in surprise. You two are getting married? I'll blurt it out, glancing between Keith and Qingyue. Qingyue's face burned crimson, but she kept her head down, pretending to read her book. Keith raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by you two? He observed Hal's restless glances between him and Qingyue before chuckling. Oh no, idiot. Qingyue isn't the bride. Then who is? Julian asked, now fully intrigued. The Prince of Samran was having a wedding at the end of the month, and yet no one had heard about it. The revelation was shocking, and if the news got out, it would undoubtedly ignite a storm of gossip. Her name is Amelia. She's not from Samran, Keith said simply, offering no further details. We need more than that. James and Eric protested. It's a private affair, only for close friends and family. I don't need you two selling details to the media. Keith scoffed before laughing at their exaggerated expressions of betrayal. I'm still telling people you're getting married. James huffed. Then, his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Is she beautiful? A little too beautiful, Keith said playfully. Amelia is just as beautiful as Qingyue. The boys immediately turned to Qingyue, who was now visibly flustered, her fair cheeks tinged with rosy color. Qingyue's heart fluttered at Keith's words. He had just indirectly called her a little too beautiful, and she couldn't deny how much she liked hearing it. Come on, show us a picture. James insisted. Don't have one on me. Keith shook his head. Some suspected it was a lie, but refrained from pressing further. Is she the future lady of the Demiliore family? Julian asked the most critical question. No. Keith shook his head, and Julian immediately understood. It meant Amelia wasn't necessarily from a powerful family, and it also implied that Keith would likely take another wife in the future. I wish you the best of luck, Julian said sincerely. Keith smirked. You sound like you don't want to attend my wedding. It's not that I don't want to. Julian trailed off. Keith cut in, don't worry. I'll send an invitation to the Grayson family. You and your family are invited. Julian frowned slightly. They both knew their families weren't exactly allies, and Keith's wording suggested he genuinely wanted him there. After a brief hesitation, Julian finally smiled. Thanks. Keith noted the slight conflict in his expression and sighed. Times are changing, Julian, and we are the future. Before Julian could respond, the professor entered the classroom, prompting everyone to take their seats. Keith had a plan. He needed to ensure the Grayson family didn't align with the Falcons. If they did, he would have no choice but to crush them as well. He was aware that the Falcons had already approached the Graysons, with plans to have Julian engaged to their eldest daughter in a few months. Preventing that was crucial. If the Graysons attended his wedding, they would undoubtedly rethink their position upon seeing the Angelinis standing firmly with the Demiliores. His wedding wasn't just about marriage. It was a declaration that the Demiliore and Angelini families were united once more. It would disrupt plans, shift alliances, and create ripple effects throughout the city. And since Rebecca Grayson was an important figure, he needed her family to at least remain neutral. It would be far too troublesome if their families became outright enemies.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Keith ended up staying at the university till Nana's classes finished, and then after dropping her off at her new home, he headed straight to the Angelini estate. His grandfather and mother would arrive there at 2 p.m. for lunch, and he wanted to meet Kiera before that and have some alone time with her. Brother. As soon as he stepped out of the car, a girl in simple jeans and a sweater came running towards him, jumping right into his arms. I missed you, Kiera, he said to her as he spun her around with him. I missed you too, but I won't forgive you for not seeing me last Friday. The little girl brilliantly smiled at him, even when she complained. Sorry. He had already informed her that he would be going out of the city for a week, but still apologized. It's okay. She nudged her nose with his and giggled. Ahem. Both of them were taken aback when they heard someone clear their throat, and the little girl burned in a scarlet blush when she found out who it was. Danielle was standing a little away, wearing a playful smile, and the little boy behind her, who was holding her hand, was grinning happily. Keith, Ben, he chuckled and put down Kiera, who stepped behind him, trying to hide away from the teasing glances of her aunt. Welcome home, Keith. Danielle stepped forward and hugged him lightly before allowing her little son to greet him. Added Novel Benedette. You look beautiful as ever, Aunt Danielle. He smiled at her and picked up Benjamin in his arms. And how's our little champ doing? I am happy, Ben told him. I have been waiting for you to visit us. Now you must play chess with me. We will have a game later. Keith promised him. And did you like your new place? It's awesome. And I will introduce you to Bells later. It's a Persian cat and a moody one, but it likes to sit in my lap. Keith knows about Bells, Ben. Kiera giggled at her little cousin. Remember I told you who gave it to me? Oh yeah. Ben embarrassedly laughed. I haven't seen that fluff ball in quite some time. So you can introduce us again, Keith said, which elated the little boy. I will. By now, Ying, who had been following him since he left the university, had parked her car on the side and was now standing behind him. Benjamin curiously looked at her and the sword she was wearing on her back. She's my bodyguard, Keith told him. Is she strong? He cutely asked. Super strong, but she's a girl. Benjamin. Danielle didn't like the way her son said those words and admonished him. Girls can be strong too, and there are many in the world who are stronger than most men. She taught him. I understand, mother. The little boy said and apologetically lowered his head to Ying. I am sorry. No worries. The girl in black indifferently said without even looking at him, which tensed the little boy. Let's go inside. Danielle greeted Ying with a nod and then invited them inside the manor. Keith grabbed Kiera's hand and pulled her with him, which made the girl happy, and she skipped along the way, telling him about how her last week went. Mother is making me learn how to cook, learn how to differentiate between wines, and she is really strict about the etiquette. She complained to him, and she is also thinking about finding me a piano and violin tutor. Complaining about your mother to your fiancé. Looks like I need to teach you some more manners, young lady, Danielle bemusedly said, which made Kiera giggle. But you already know about wines. Are you pretending to not know anything just so you can keep tasting them? He narrowed his eyes at her, and Kiera playfully pulled her tongue at him. You are in trouble, little miss, the older woman sternly said to her, and this time Kiera did not dare to laugh at her warning. Keith could see that Kiera didn't really mind learning all these things. She was a person who loved learning new skills, and the more you teach her, the more excited she would become. And he knew that she had always wanted to improve on her piano skills. He had arranged for a tutor for her when she had turned 7, and she knew the basics of it. But she could not really play anything other than some elementary tunes. How about I teach you both piano and violin? He proposed. Really? Kiera jumped up in joy, but then co-trained it. Are you sure? You have your own business now, and you're going to be very busy. Don't worry about it. I will only teach you once a week, every Sunday. And violin lessons come first. Keith said to her, and then looked at Danielle, who nodded to him, giving him the permission. Thank you. Kiera hugged him tightly, which earned her some more teasing glances from her aunt. Keith, you can play violin? Ben curiously asked. Of course I can. How else would I teach it to your sister if I don't know how to play it? Can you teach me too? The little boy requested. I always love the tune when Mama plays it, but she never had time to teach me. You were too young, Ben, and now that you are about the age when you can start learning it, I was thinking about finding a teacher for you. Danielle lovingly ruffled her son's hair. You can join Kiera in the lessons, silly boy. Keith smiled at him. Thank you. Ben, who was still in his arms, kissed him on the cheek. You're welcome, he said, and returned the courtesy by kissing him on his chubby cheek. Danielle left the four of them alone in the drawing room and sent over some refreshments for them. But horses are scary, Ben cowered and said when Keith invited them over to his home to see the ranch on their estate. They are only scary when you don't know them. Once you learn how loyal and loving they are, you will fall in love with them, Kiera convincingly said to her little cousin, who were still not sure if it was something he wanted. And brother, can you help me get Jen out of that club? She asked for her favorite horse to be taken out of the club where it was staying. Sure. The club is only responsible of taking care of him. I'm the one who owns him. Keith nodded to her. Do you want me to send him to the Angelini estate, or should I put him in the ranch at the Demiliore estate? Demiliore estate. She had already thought over it, and after today, when their families have officially agreed on their engagement, she would be able to go over to the Demiliore estate whenever she would want to. Kiera, as they were talking about things, the door of the room opened, and in came Danielle, sternly looking at her niece. Yes, mother, Kiera confusedly asked. What time is it? As soon as the little girl looked at the clock, she tensed up. Come with me. I will help you get ready. Danielle stepped forward and pulled her by her hand. We want you looking your best when you meet your mother-in-law. Vanessa is really strict about the appearance and etiquette. Understand, mother. Kiera depressedly lowered her head, and Keith smiled when he saw the nervousness on her face. Go. I will accompany little Ben to a couple of games of chess, he assured her when she turned to look back at him. As soon as the two of them left the room, Keith couldn't help but sigh. He wanted to tell her about his upcoming wedding, but now it looked like it would have to wait. Ben caught him sighing and curiously looked at him. You are sighing. Is something troubling you? He asked. No, silly boy. He smiled at her sharp little boy. Go, bring the chessboard so we can have a few games. Yay! The little boy immediately nodded to him and rushed out of the room. What's up? He asked his shadow, who was standing behind him. I'm not sure what you mean by that, master. I can feel that you are behaving a little odd, he said, and turned to look her. And as soon as their eyes met, Inging lowered her head. Say it, he ordered her. You should have let me in your car before you decided to come here, master. Keith frowned at her words. Do you think I am in danger here? Inging kept her head lowered and stayed silent. He knew that she was just worried about his safety, and ever since the night he got himself hurt, she had been blaming herself in her heart. We are safe here, Inging. I know it is good to be cautious, but being too cautious would never allow you to trust anyone. I'm not supposed to trust anyone. I am your shadow, master, and your safety and well-being is my only responsibility. She kept her eyes lowered, but spoke resolutely. I know, he sighed. Come sit with me. Inging hesitated a little, but then listened to his words. As soon as she took her seat, she was pulled by him in his arms, and his haunting deep brown eyes looked right into her beautiful orbs, which were a lighter shade of brown. He smiled when he saw her eyes slightly quiver under his gaze, and then he leaned in, catching her lips in a soft kiss. You are silly, but you are mine. He chuckled near her ear. Next time, you could just try to politely ask me about what you want. If you want to come sit with me in my car, you can simply call me and ask for it. It's not. Inging tried to explain herself, but Keith silenced her by stealing another kiss, which flustered her even more. Keith knew that she was only worried about his safety, but how could he miss on a chance to tease her? He let her go as soon as the door opened, and little Ben came running towards him, panting heavily. Let's play, the boy said as soon as he climbed the couch, and without even taking time to catch his breath, he started assembling the pieces on the board. There's no rush, silly boy. Keith chuckled at his behavior and helped him set the pieces. We will start the game after you have caught your breath. Ben did not argue and decided to do what he was told. Let's play again, Benjamin cutely announced. Even after losing several games in quick succession, he was not in the least discouraged and wanted to play more. That's enough for today, Ben. Keith gently ruffled his hair and smiled at him. We will play some other day. The little boy deflated a little at his words, but soon recovered and smiled brightly. Come. He enthusiastically stood up. I will introduce you to Bells. Okay, let's go. Keith glanced at the clock, which was about to hit 2 p.m., and nodded to Ben. Ying silently followed her master, who was allowing the little boy to hold his hand and lead him to his room. Along the way, Ben informed him that his sister allowed him to keep Bells in his room after he requested her about it, and he talked in detail of how he had been taking care of it, serving it the meals, and then grooming it every night before going to bed. Bells! Ben ran ahead and entered his room, and by the time Keith entered, the little boy was already holding the fluffy, white, doll-faced Persian cat in his arms, at it novel been at. Bells is in good health, Ben. You have been doing a good job. He praised the little boy after he accepted the lazy cat in his arms. Bells looked at him with its beautiful blue eyes, and by how well behaved it was in his arms, it was evident that it had recognized him. Keith gently scratched the back of its head with his fingertips, and the cat cutely purred under his ministrations. Ben laughed happily when he heard the cat purr, and clapped his hands applauding Keith for doing a good job. The fluff ball snuggled deeper into Keith's arms, loving his body heat, and then closed its eyes, ready for another nap. As lazy as ever. Keith chuckled when he saw it behave the way it usually did. "Why don't you go freshen up? It is lunchtime," he said to the little boy. "Give me 5 minutes." Ben nodded his head and then ran into the washroom to get ready. "Want to hold him?" Keith smiled at Ying and offered Bells to her. "No." She shook her head and then checked the watch on her wrist that had just vibrated. "Lady Vanessa and Master Demiliore are here," she informed him. "Let's go." He nodded to her and then walked out of the room after putting the sleeping cat in its bed. It was quite a big place, and it took them a few minutes to arrive outside the manor, where Danielle and Damien were receiving his family. Keith looked around and sighed in relief when he saw that Sol had chosen not to appear before his mother. It was for the best, and he carefully observed the reaction of Damien, who greeted Caesar with a handshake. Even though he knew that Damien held no goodwill toward his late father, but shaking the hand of the very man who had killed him must have gripped his heart a little. "Grandfather." He approached them and greeted his old man first, who simply patted his shoulder and nodded at him. Keith then proceeded to hug his mother and squeezed he lightly in his arms. "I love you," he whispered near her ear. "I know." She giggled and planted a kiss on his cheek before they separated. "Uncle Damien." He smiled at the tall man who towered him and found him smiling back at him. "I expected you to visit us in the last few days, but Kiera informed me that you were out of the city to attend to some important matters. Everything went well." "Yes." He nodded to him. "We will talk about it after lunch." Damien curiously raised his brow at his words, but nodded his head before inviting the Demiliore family to come inside the manor. It wasn't the first time Reiser and Vanessa had come here, and in their childhood, this manor was like a second home to them. However, neither Reiser nor Vanessa looked at anything in nostalgia. They both looked focused and wore indifferent expressions on their faces. Danielle worriedly glanced at him, but Keith smiled at her and nodded his head, assuring her that everything will be fine. She had known Vanessa since childhood, and even if they had drifted apart after all that transpired, she was still expecting her former friend to greet her warmly. But Vanessa had not shared anything more than a polite greeting with her. Damien led all of them to the study of the current head of the Angolini family. And for the first time in a long while, Keith caught his grandfather sighing. "How's the old man doing?" he asked. "He has been doing better since last week." Damien hesitated to say more and then just turned silent, lowering his head in shame. Keith knew that he was feeling guilty for not being here all these years to take care of Darius. And now that he knew the state of the old man's body, he was blaming himself for being too stubborn. "Keith!" Reiser suddenly called out to him, and Keith understood what he wanted to know. "I did not give him a checkup last time, but from my observation, he only has a little more than a year's life left in him. If it was anyone else, they might have passed away years ago, but he is only alive due to his stubborn desire to protect the legacy of Angolini." His words made them all frown, and Reiser closed his eyes, trying to suppress the emotions in his heart. "I will go inside first," he said, and knocked on the door before entering the room. Everyone knew that they needed some alone time. It had been nearly 2 decades since the son-in-law and the father-in-law last met each other. And from what Keith had gathered from the things Caesar had told him, Darius had always treated Reiser just like a son. Aunt Diana is busy. Danielle decided to break the ice and ask Keith. Yes. He nodded to her. She will be returning home on Wednesday, and she will stay in Samran for a couple of weeks. Both Danielle and Damien nodded to him, and then the former mustered up the courage to talk to Vanessa. You are as beautiful as ever, Ness. I feel like an old lady standing next to you. She sincerely smiled at her. Thank you. Vanessa smiled back at her, and for a moment everyone thought that this was it and she would ignore them again, but she did not. I heard you gave birth to a little angel, Danny. I would love to meet him. His name is Benjamin, and he would love to meet you too. Danielle felt like a lot of weight has been lifted off her chest when she heard Vanessa call her by the nickname. And from her words, it could be felt that she was willing to let the bygones be bygones. I was planning to visit Samran University in the next few days. Would you like to come with me? I really want to see all our favorite spots on the campus again. She proposed. Soon the two of them were chatting about their daily lives, and they even set a date to visit the campus in the next week. And by the smiles they wore, it appeared that they were happy to see each other again. Vanessa was a good actor, so good that she could lie to anyone. But Keith was her son, and he had inherited these traits from her. How could he not know that the smiling eyes of his mother were not really smiling? She was only standing here in this manner because of him, and he knew that she was only willing to bear all these people just because her love for him dwarfed the resentment she held in her heart for the Angolini family. Come in. Reiser opened the door of the study after a while, inviting them inside. Great father. Keith took the lead and approached the old man who was sitting on the couch. Young Demiliore. Darius smiled at him. You look more sharp than the last time I saw you. Some things happened. We will talk about them later. He smiled and nodded to him before turning to look at Vanessa. He found her smiling lightly as she stepped forward, and then she lightly bowed to the old man. It's been a while, grandfather, she said, and then straightened up, looking the old man in the eyes. You have grown older. Darius stayed silent as he kept looking at her, and Keith knew that he must have sensed that Vanessa was not really happy being here, and the sigh that escaped his lips later proved his hunch. I'm happy to see my only living granddaughter again, Vanessa, he said to her, and you are beautiful as ever, Darius said, and then held onto his cane, helping himself up. Damien was about to step forward to help him, but the old man raised his hand and stopped him. Under the uncomfortable eyes of everyone, he came to stand in front of his granddaughter, and then lowered his head to her. I know it won't make you feel better about everything, but allow your grandfather to be selfish and say what he wants to say, he said, and then waited a while to say his next words. I'm sorry, Vanessa. There was a lot that I could have done to prevent everything that happened, but I was weak, and I paid for my mistakes by losing my family. Forgive me if you can ever find it in your heart. Everyone tensed at his words, and then waited with bated breaths for how Vanessa would respond to what had just happened. Darius Angolini, a man who was known to have never bowed to anyone in his life, had just lowered his head in front of his estranged granddaughter. You don't have to worry about anything, grandfather. I love my child a little too much. She smiled at him and responded after a few seconds. It might have not been the answer that Darius wanted, but it was enough to free him of his worries. However, things turned out better when she stepped forward and lightly hugged him. Please pay more attention to your health. I will hold on for a while longer, my child. Darius chuckled and nodded to her. Good afternoon, Lady Demiliore. Kiera nervously looked at the woman whose deep brown eyes were locked on her, freezing her in her place. It's nice to meet you. Keith had never before seen his little sister so nervous in her life. But at this moment, he did not dare to step forward and help her out. He knew that it would only result in hurting Vanessa more. Reiser stayed silent too, not interfering in the matter. And everyone else seemed to have reached some tacit understanding and kept quiet as well, avoiding Kiera's eyes, who was glancing at them for help. The poor little girl did not know how much pain her mother had caused to Vanessa, but they knew that if there were two people who had lost the most in everything that transpired, they were Darius and Vanessa. But considering the facts that she not only lost her husband who had betrayed her, but also lost her sibling and parents when she was only a young mother and a lady in her early 20s, her suffering was far worse than anyone else. Her mother had passed away from the grief of losing her husband and son at the hands of her own brother. But Vanessa had survived losing almost everyone that she loved. And not only had she survived, she had stayed strong for her child. She was strong, far stronger than the men in this room, who knew that if Vanessa decided to not accept Kiera today, they could not really blame her for it. Guilt gripped Keith's heart too as he realized what he was putting his mother through. And when he felt her turn to look at him, he stared right into her eyes, but eventually found it hard to maintain the gaze and lowered his head. "You are a beautiful little girl." Vanessa turned to look at Kiera again, and she had a light smile on her lips. "But you are yet to introduce yourself to me." "I am sorry." Kiera was flustered when she heard those words and immediately bowed to her future mother-in-law. "My name is Kiera. Kiera Angelini." "Oh, an Angelini, huh?" Vanessa brightly smiled at her. "How would you then explain your features that scream Demiliore to me? You look a lot like my son, my late husband, and you even share a resemblance with me. We have the same hair, and your forehead too looks just like mine." The little girl lowered her head, slightly trembling in nervousness and anxiety. She knew the answer to her questions, but she also knew that it was for the best that she did not bring up the affair that led to her birth in front of Vanessa. "Vanessa Demiliore." She offered her hand to the little girl and introduced herself. "I am Keith's mother." Kiera stayed frozen in her place for a few seconds, but then mustered up the courage to shake her hand. "Kiera." She did not say her last name this time. "I am Keith's sister," but she stated her position. "Wouldn't that make you my daughter then?" Vanessa smirked at her bold words and lightly squeezed the soft hand that she was holding before letting it go. The blue-eyed girl trembled all over and hurriedly nodded her head. "Good," she heard the older woman say. "Call me mother from now on." Her words not just shocked the little girl, but everyone present as well. No one had expected her to be so generous to this poor little girl. Kiera could not believe her ears when she heard the words of Vanessa, and then her eyes turned misty and she swiftly nodded her head, trying her best to suppress the smile on her lips. She knew that she had gotten the permission of Vanessa to be with Keith, and her heart was free of all worries now. "Thank you, Mother," she gratefully said. Vanessa smiled at her happiness, and then smiled even more when she glanced at her son and found him still not daring to look at her. "And who's this little angel?" She crouched down and looked at the little boy who had been silently standing right next to Kiera. "I am Ben." The little boy smiled and stepped forward, drawing his hand forward. "Ah." Vanessa shook hands with him and then lightly pulled him to her. "You are so cute," she said while squeezing the little boy's chubby cheeks. Benjamin only let out innocent giggles at being treated the same way everyone treated him. By now, he was used to people playing with his cheeks and was always expecting such a thing to happen. "You are beautiful, Lady Demiliore." He tried to sound respectful like his mother had taught him, but the words coming out of his mouth were filled with cuteness. "Well, thank you, young man." Vanessa gave him a kiss on the cheek and then stood up, lightly ruffling his hair. "He's beautiful." She turned to his parents and said to them. Danielle was very elated to hear that and nodded her head politely, and Damien replied with a polite nod of his own. The two families then approached the dining table, and under the grateful eyes of Darius, they harmoniously sat together talking about miscellaneous things as the two maids served them the lunch. "Do you need any assistance with her identity documents?" Ray Iser asked Damien, who was sitting adjacent to him. "No." Damien shook his head. "I have used the Dragon Core Intelligence Network to deal with everything. No one can access the data of me and my family." It was one of the perks of being a member of the Netherian Special Forces, and since Damien was third in command of them, he was entitled to even more privileges. "And your plans for her adopted family?" "I'm sending them both on a world tour, and they won't be returning to Netheria for a year. Upon their return, I will arrange for them to live here on the estate and work for us." The future master of Angelini family revealed his plan. Ray Iser nodded in satisfaction and then looked at the little girl who was trying her best to not talk much with Keith, fearing that Vanessa might find it inappropriate. He had always been secretly keeping an eye on her, wishing that someday he could bring her into the family. But as the master of Demiliore family, he could not shirk his responsibilities no matter how much his heart desired to do something. Kiera caught him looking at her and then brilliantly smiled at him, which made him chuckle happily. Do you want to marry him as soon as you turn 16, or do you want to wait for a few more years? He mischievously asked her, and chuckled some more when she turned red from embarrassment and lowered her head. Now that the subject had been brought up, everyone stopped eating and thought over it for a while. What do you think? Damien turned to Keith and asked. I think it would be for the best if we arrange for it on her 18th birthday, 21st of September, 2044. Keith answered him and smiled at his little sister who was frowning at him. He knew that she planned on marrying him as soon as she turned 16, but it would not be appropriate considering all the plans he has in place for the next 3 years. I don't want to wait that long. She did not care about anyone else, and said as she looked him in his eyes. She did not want to wait for nearly 4 years to finally be able to live with him under the same roof. Neither do I, but I will be busy in the coming years, and there's a lot that I need to do. Added Novel Benedette. Kiera seemed a little depressed and lowered her head, not saying anything. Damien and Danielle really wanted to comfort her, but they found Keith's proposal very appropriate. It would give them time to be with Kiera, and it would also help her grow into a fine lady capable of becoming the future lady of Demiliore family. I don't think I would live to see that day. Darius amiably smiled at his great daughter. I want to see you wedded before I leave this world. Keith apologetically lowered his head at the words of Darius and thought things over again. How about we hold a private wedding on her 15th birthday next year? Reiser proposed. And then when she turns 18, you two can officially hold a wedding ceremony. Kiera was elated to hear such a proposal, and then hopefully looked at Keith for an answer. I agree with Father's proposal. It's better for her to wed him as soon as possible, and I want to personally observe her growth and train her as the future lady of Demiliore family. To the surprise of everyone, it was Vanessa who helped Kiera out, but she will be mostly living at the Angolini estate until they are officially married. She added, I'm fine with that. Damien nodded his head, and Danielle sighed and nodded too. All right. Keith helplessly raised his head and feigned a sigh, which earned him a punch from Kiera into his left arm. You don't seem happy about it. She accusingly looked at him, narrowing her brilliant blue eyes. Do you think I'm not happy about it? He nudged her nose with his finger, which washed away all her dissatisfaction and made her smile. When do you want us to announce the alliance between our families? Danielle asked. Grandfather is putting me in charge of the Angolini group of industries, and it would be helpful to cushion the blow if the alliance is official. Everyone knew that she meant by that. A lot of enemies were eyeing the Angolini business, and as soon as Danielle takes over, they will come hounding her. Reiser, Vanessa, and Keith already knew what the best opportunity would be, and it was something they were here to discuss as well. I'm getting married on 31st of December, Keith said to the surprise of Angolini family. Lynn's will be there, hopefully Grayson's too. And Clark's are family friends, they will be there too. Demiliore, Angolini, Falcon, Grayson, Clark, and Lynn were the 6 major families of the same Rand City. And Keith planned on having everyone but the Falcon on his wedding. However, no one in the Angolini family was thinking about his plan. They were still surprised about the news that he was getting married in 2 weeks. Who's the lucky lady? Danielle frowned when she found her niece disturbed by Keith's words and asked critically. Keith smiled at his little sister and assuringly squeezed her soft hand. Her name is Amelia, and she belongs to an ancient family. He turned to Danielle and answered her. Danielle frowned at his answer, but Damien and Darius turned solemn. Which one? Darius asked. The Morn Tale of Magic City. Is it wise to get involved into the matters of ancient families? Damien seriously asked him. He knew the details of all the ancient families in Netheria, and as such he knew about everything that had been going on in the Magic City. The Cold War between the ancient families of Magic City had ended, but this did not mean that there will be no future conflict. And the chances were that things would heat up again in the next few years. Keith marrying a member of an ancient family meant that he would be pulled into the conflict too. And Damien wanted to make sure that the young man knew what he was getting into. I did not do it specifically for an alliance, Uncle. And an alliance would not be a bad thing for us. Keith told him, You know the situation better than me. Morntail are financially in a dire state after the Cold War, but they have managed to preserve their strength better than the other families. An alliance WTH my family would help them financially, which would make sure that their enemies would stay wary of them, and another war would not break out for the next few years. Your alliance might push the other families to find backers for themselves. It could worsen the situation. Damien reminded him. Keith devilishly smiled at his words and nodded. Then let them. I actually want them to find a backer for themselves, and I have one in my mind. Reiser narrowed his eyes at his grandson, and Darius turned solemn as well. You plan to throw the falcon in the pit. Vanessa understood his intentions and asked, wearing the same devilish smile on her face. And how would you make sure that they fall in your trap? I'm actually betting on them to do it without us needing to pull some strings. But if an opportunity presents itself, I will avail it. You don't sound too keen on this plan of yours. Reiser smiled at him. That's because I have several plans in my mind, and one way or another, I am going to eliminate Falcon from our city. He bared his intentions. The Angolini cannot afford a business warfare right now. We are tight on finances. Darius revealed to him. Don't worry about these things, great father. I don't plan on expending our family's resources to achieve my goals. I will do it on my own. Keith assured him. The plans are already in motion, and one of the reasons why I want to marry Amelia is because I need her help. Is she that capable? Danielle frowned and asked. She's the best. He chuckled to himself. Anyways, we will talk about these things in February. For now, let's talk about my wedding. Everyone was curious why he wanted to discuss about these things in February, but they did not pry into the matter. Do you need me to be there? Darius asked. The presence of Uncle Damien and Aunt Danielle would be enough, but I want you to attend my wedding, great father. He sincerely said. And don't worry about your health. You will be fine to attend it. Darius chuckled to his words. What makes you so confident? I have confidence in my skills. Keith seriously said. He's a doctor, and from what I have gathered, he's miraculous. Seeing Darius curiously raise his brow, Reiser told them what Keith meant by his words. I will give you a checkup later, he said to the old man before anyone could ask him about his skills. And other than the 5 major famils, I only want close friends and associates present on my wedding. Only the media group of Demiliore family will cover it. The 2 families then discussed the plans for his upcoming wedding, and Danielle requested Keith to allow her fashion and designing company to prepare wedding dresses for him and his bride, which he gave her a go for since it did not really matter to him. After lunch, the men gathered in Darius' study and talked about some important matters as Keith checked up on the old man. The list you gave Sol about those moles in Angolini business empire was on point. He is already working on gathering evidence, and all of these people will be dealt with in the coming months, Darius said, and then looked the young Demiliore right in his eyes. From what I have gathered, Graysons are already on the same camp with Falcon. How do you plan to change their mind? They are only motivated by beating my family in business. We don't have any personal grievances against each other. So, all I have to do is make the prospect of them catching up to my family a hopeless endeavor, he said. And the reason why they're on the same camp right now is because they think that Angolini family is on their own. The moment they learn about our alliance, they would hesitate to go with the plans of Falcon, he said, and focused on inspecting the body of Darius. Reiser and Damien curiously looked at his glowing hands, which were placed on Darius' bare back, at it novel Benedat. Don't be alarmed if you feel cold and warm at the same time, he said to Darius, and then started to trace his back with his 4 fingers. It was the node tracing technique, and the process was similar to how he had treated Celine, but this time he was not working on the patient's heart, but focused on strengthening the blood channels and invigorating the immune system. Once he was done with it, expending more than half of his aura reserves, he then focused on the muscles that connected the joints on the body. Had Darius been a couple of decades younger, he could have even helped him de-age a decade or so, but the state of his body was at an extreme end. It cannot be done now. Soon the changes in Darius' body became visible to the naked eye, and Damien couldn't not hide his surprised expression when he found the old man's body relaxing and his breaths getting deeper and more stable. Try stretching your arms, Keith said, and Darius, who was feeling light after so many years, complied with his directions. Even if he was an old man who usually stayed calm and collected, He could not help but lose himself to this familiar, yet an alien feeling. How many years have been since he last stretched out his arms and felt his spine relaxing as a result? How do you feel? Keith chuckled when he saw the old man curiously testing out the state of his body. Far better than what those so-called doctors achieved by putting me on those medications, he unpleasantly said, and then took in a deep breath. I feel good, young Demiliore, but I want to hear it from you. What's the prize for this feeling? Keith sighed and stopped smiling. Rest assured that it won't aggravate the situation of your body. It will give you some more time, great father. How much time? It was Damien who hopefully asked, but the old man was frowning. 2 years in this state, but after that, I will have to burn his vitality to keep him alive for a few more years. His body will start giving out, and it will be an excruciating feeling. But I have ways to numb it down, and if I regularly give him a certain treatment, he won't feel too weak. There's no need for it. Darius adamantly shook his head. 2 years in this state is more than I want. You're not allowed to forcefully keep me around after that. He determinedly said. Grandfather, Damien tried to say something. I'm an old man, child. I have lived my life, and I am tired. He smiled at his grandson. I will stay around for 2 more years, but then I want to go and join those that I have lost. Hopefully, they're waiting for me in the afterlife. The longing in his expressions was evidence to how much he missed his loved ones. Damien lowered his head and clenched his fists, nodding his head in acceptance. He was always prepared to lose the old man in a year's time, but now that he had gotten the chance to spend more time with him, he was determined to make up for the years where he had left as his old man on his own, drowning in his loneliness. Keith left them alone in the study after he excused himself, citing that he needed some rest, which he did need, but he intended to talk with his little sister, who was a little upset after the news about his wedding. He asked a maid on his way and was led to Kiera's room. She was not there, and he decided to wait for her as he took off his shoes and unceremoniously made himself comfortable on her bed. His eyes had only closed for a few minutes when his phone rang, and Keith was surprised to see who was calling him. Good afternoon, love. He happily greeted her. Miss me? The girl on the phone stayed silent for a few seconds, but then answered him. I'm coming to Samran City tomorrow. What? Keith surprisingly asked. Is there a problem? Amelia coldly asked. There's no problem, love. He playfully smiled. I'm just surprised that you could not wait just a week to see me. We need to start working on the projects, and I need to know what you specifically want in them to prepare the right blueprints. She plainly said, So you don't miss me? I have not known you long enough to miss you. Is that so? He brightly smiled, but got no reply from her. What time? 6 p.m. I will pick you up, Keith said to her. And Amelia, yes. I miss you, he sincerely said to her. Take care. It was all she said, and then ended the call. Keith chuckled to himself as he saw through her desire to be with him. He knew that she could have started working on these projects a week later, but she chose to do it now, and then decided to come to him too. He still remembered the morning he took his leave from the Morntail estate. She did not say anything about it, but the little frown that she hid as soon as it appeared did not miss his eyes. And he knew that she was a little dissatisfied with him, even if she was not really mad at him. You seem happy, Keith. A sour yet sweet voice called out, and when he looked towards the door, he found Kiera standing there with her arms folded on her chest. So who is Amelia? Come here. He did not answer her, but invited her on the bed. Kiera did not play around and climbed onto the bed, sitting cross-legged right next to him and narrowing her beautiful blue eyes at him. Jealous? Yes, she said. Shouldn't I be? Keith sighed and decided to not tease her about it. She's a beautiful girl, tall, 24 years old, raven hair, emerald green eyes. She has a degree in architecture and another in civil engineering. Doesn't talk much and loves silence. Seldom listens to music, preferably stringed instruments, but doesn't really like songs. He said to her, What do you want to know now? You love her? She asked. I have no reservations against falling in love with her, and I do want to end up loving her. He said, How beautiful is she? She's perfect. He smiled at her. More than me? She coldly asked. You will have to decide it on your own when you see her. He nudged her nose with his finger. But I must say, It is nearly impossible for someone to be more perfect than me. He waited before he said the last word, and Kiera pounced on him angrily, trying to lock his neck with her arm. "You are too much," she angrily said, and started punching him on the side of his arms after she failed to grab his neck. Keith only laughed under her assault, which infuriated her more, and then she started putting some real power behind her hits. However, she still kept hiding his arms and did not dare to harm him in any way. "That's enough, Kiera." He stopped laughing when he saw her eyes turning misty and locked her in his arms after making her sit in his lap. "Remember I once told you that you are just as perfect as me?" He whispered near her ear. "No." She shook her head, denying it. "Well, you are nearly as perfect as me." He chuckled. "Keith, okay. He sighed helplessly. "Why did you never tell me about her?" Kiera asked when she calmed down a little. "I only met her last week, Kiera," he said, and felt her body finally relaxing. "She knows about me?" "Yes." "And she doesn't mind?" she asked. "No." He smiled and squeezed her in his arms. "She will be your sister wife, Kiera, and if you would allow your heart to accept her, you will not regret it," he seriously said. "Oomph." She pouted. "Like you have left me any other choice. At least, with her around, you will stop sleeping around with other girls." "I'm not quite sure about that, my sweet little sister." He devilishly smiled. "You see, everybody has a different taste and feeling. I don't want to hear your nonsense again." She put her hands on her ears, refusing to listen to what he was saying. "Uh-huh." Keith laughed, and then pinned her down and started tickling her belly. The room soon echoed with the sonorous laughter of a girl, who was begging for him to stop his assault, but he was a merciless man. "What are you planning, Mother?" Keith looked at his mother, who was wearing a light smile on her lips since she returned home. And right now, she was sitting on his couch, going through all the information of Kiera right in front of him. He knew that something was brewing in her mind the moment she had asked Kiera to call her mother, and he was more sure of it now that she had bared her intentions in front of him. "Why, my child?" She looked up at him right into his eyes. "Scared that I would harm your little princess?" The young Demiliore remained silent, and they both kept looking at each other for a minute. "You know, she looked a lot like Alicia," Vanessa lightly said as she returned her eyes back to the file of Kiera. "But she's more beautiful. A perfect union of Demiliore and Angelini genes, just like me." He did not know what she was trying to get at, and kept quiet, waiting for her to get to the point. "Alicia was beautiful, but I always had an edge over her. Even your foolish father admitted that I was more beautiful than her." She lightly smiled. "Yet, he loved her more than me." She would rub that fact in my face whenever she got the chance, and I would keep reminding her that despite all her hopes, she would never become the lady of the Demiliore family. "Do you know why I was so sure of it?" "Why?" "I want to hear your thoughts." She gently smiled at him. Keith frowned at her words and thought things over for a while. "She wasn't as good as you in anything." He narrowed his eyes at her when he saw a brilliant smile bloom on her face. "Yes, she wasn't, and the same went for your father." She closed the file and put it on the table. If it wasn't for their arranged marriage that was set in stone since they were children, she wouldn't even be considered for the position of the lady of the Demiliore family. But even then, both Fommels realized that I was more likely to get that position. It was only fair that I got it, and guess what? Uncle Reiser appointed me as the future lady of Demiliore family on my 21st birthday. Vanessa informed him, and then recalled the following events. "You should have seen her face, Keith." She giggled to herself. "She challenged me right in front of our group of friends that one day she will surpass me in everything. She was really stubborn, I will give her that. But sadly for her, and for everyone, her father did not take too well of the news. It was never stated in their marriage contract that she would become the lady of Demiliore family." Keith sighed. It wasn't. But her father only needed an excuse to do what he did next. She narrowed her eyes at her left hand where she once used to wear her wedding band. He tore up the marriage contract and gave Alicia in marriage to fucking family. She ruefully smiled. "Do you know, Keith, your father begged me to help him and Alicia, and she asked for my help too." Her words surprised him. "And you did?" He felt his heart clenching. "I did." She nodded to him. "We were like sisters, Keith. We fought a lot, but at the end of the day, We always sat together and laughed at our antics. I was never against her marrying Michael, and we both looked forward to living our lives together as sister wives, even if we had drifted apart over time. But things did not go according to the plan. He frowned. No, nothing went according to the plan. She clenched her fist tightly. To break up the marriage contract between our families without a sound reason was akin to a slap on our family's face. She coldly said, "That stupid man did not know what he was getting into, and because of his stupidity, the business of the two families took a hard hit." Vanessa closed her eyes and took a deep breath as she recollected everything that happened all those years ago. My father was in charge of Demiliore business, and he did not take too kindly of the behavior of the Angelini family. He was a smart man, but he only had one drawback, and that was that he allowed his emotions to rule over him at times when he shouldn't. She sadly smiled. He threatened the head of Angelini family, Alicia's father, to end the farce and issue a public statement that all was a misunderstanding, or else he would make them suffer and publicize everything incriminating he had against him and the Falcon family. She smiled and couldn't help the tear that escaped her eyes. They did not take his words seriously, but he was a man of his words. There was a light smile on her lips. In the coming 2 weeks, the Angelini and Falcon families lost tens of billions of Neris. They did not call him the god of Samran for nothing, and he was just getting started. From her words, it could be discerned that she idolized her father a lot, and she was proud of him. "You know how they killed him, right, my child?" Vanessa turned to look at him and asked, and smiled. She saw her son lower his head in guilt. They called him and asked for a delegation, and Alicia's father even apologized to him and promised to restore the marriage contract and alliance between the two families. She coldly said, "He fell for it," and went to meet them without taking enough security measures. She couldn't help the tears that pooled out. They killed their guest, Keith, and no matter which culture you belong to, killing your guest is a taboo. Keith clenched his fists and kept his head lowered. Sometimes I wonder, Keith, had I never asked my father to help Michael and Alicia, would he have lived? My brother, who was consumed with vengeance, would still be by my side and have a family of his own? Would I still have my mother, who was consumed by the grief that eventually killed her? The more he heard her pained words, the guilt that was consuming his heart raged more. My father had called me to inform me about his meeting, and I told him that Alicia could become the lady of Demiliore family if the Angelini restored her marriage contract. I was willing to give up something I always wanted just so I could have a whole family. But with my father's death, all my hopes came crashing down. And even after every ring that happened, Michael and Alicia still stayed just as selfish. I lost everyone, Keith, she whispered, and when I needed my husband the most, he decided to run away with the one he really loved. Her voice became hoarse. "It hurt me, Keith. It really did when I killed Alicia. But your father had left me no other choice, and she wanted to take him away from me, his wife, and away from you, his son, who would need him in his life." Keith could no longer just stand there and rushed forward to hold her in his arms. Vanessa sobbed in his embrace, held tightly onto him, and her body kept trembling as waves of emotions crashed on her heart. "At it novel been at. I was so scared, Keith. When I learned that you too had been in an accident, I felt like my soul was leaving my body. But do you know, in that moment, I did not care about him at all. All I wanted from God was to return my child to me, and you were returned to me unscathed," she whispered, "and I promised myself that I would always keep you happy and safe. For I don't love anything but you, Keith. I would die if you're not there anymore." "Mother," he planted a kiss on her head. "I promise I will always be there. I believe you." She palely smiled. "I'm willing to bear all the pains just to have you by my side, Keith." He wanted to say that he would never let her get hurt, but couldn't bring himself to say those words. He had hurt her today, and he knew it. "I will raise your precious princess to be better than her mother. It will be my revenge against the two who sired her." She evilly giggled. Alicia never got to hear her child call her mother, but her very child would be calling me that. I will influence her, shape her, until there is nothing of her mother left in her other than her pretty blue eyes. Keith frowned at her words and stayed quiet. "You have nothing to say?" she curiously asked. "No, He shook his head, and Vanessa subsidely looked at him. Do as you wish. He smiled at her when he found her frowning. He knew that she was not bluffing, but he was content in his heart. From her words, he knew that she would not really harm Kiera, and if she wanted to shape Kiera according to her will, he was willing to let her do it. I will always be there for the two of you, he reminded her, and Vanessa understood what he was implying. Not that she planned on harming the little girl, but hearing Keith make it clear that he would protect the little girl before she's harmed dissatisfied her a little. She buried her face back in his chest and took a deep breath, inhaling his scent, and her nerves relaxed. Take me to bed, she softly whispered, and Keith gently picked her up in his arms and took her to bed. It was not long before they were free of their clothes, holding each other naked in their arms. Keith could not help his curious hands, which roamed all over her gorgeous body. He clawed at her soft flesh, digging his fingers in her ass, and as his hands and the fire in his loins grew more agitated, he stroked her back and gently clawed her waist. Vanessa rolled together with him on the bed as she fought for dominance, and eventually he allowed her to get on top of him. She kissed him fervently, tasting his lips and playing with his tongue, and when he groaned in agitation, she allowed him to enter her confines. They both gasped in unison at the pleasure that assaulted their nerves, and they started moving, establishing a rhythm that was just as comfortable as it was pleasurable. Vanessa mischievously smiled when she looked at his floor-soaked face, and he grinned at her when he looked in her misty eyes and listened to those seductive moans leaking of her luscious lips. Kiss me, he commanded, and Vanessa leaned over him, putting her hands on either side of his head, supporting herself, and then nibbled on his lip. Keith clawed her as painfully, guiding her movements, and then he could no longer stay calm and started pounding her insides relentlessly. Yes. Vanessa rolled her eyes back and moaned in his mouth, her body squirming a little at the impending orgasm. Some clarity returned to her when she felt herself being flung over and then getting pinned under him. But waves of pleasure assaulted her when he started moving again, grunting near her ear. She wrapped her legs around his waist, giving him better access inside of her, and started singing his name with her pleasure-soaked voice. Every time he hit her cervix, jolts of pleasure coursed through her, and she couldn't help herself but mark him, biting on his shoulder and then sucking on his neck, leaving hickeys all over him. Keith! She cried out his name when she finally fell off the peak, and her insides painfully clenched around him, stopping his movements. Keith gritted his teeth and buried his length inside of her, filling her to the brim, and then let himself loose, panting her insides in his essence. Her body trembled when she felt the heat transmit to her womb, and when she opened her eyes, she found her beloved looking back at her. She gently raised her hand and stroked his cheek before she started caressing his head, running her fingers through his hair. Keith could not help himself and leaned in, planting light kisses all over her face. And a beautiful smile adorned her face as she bathed in his affection. You are beautiful, he told her. I know, she giggled back. I love you, he smiled at her. I know, she teased him and then came close to his ear. I don't want to sleep tonight, she seductively whispered and ignited the fire in his loins once more. I have no plans for letting you rest tonight, my beautiful mother. He smirked at her and started moving inside of her again. I hope you can stay true to your words, my sweet child. She started responding by moving her hips forward, adeptly replying his thrusts, making them both grunt and moan in pleasure once again. They fought hard and fought well, but one of them was bound to tire out first. Vanessa smiled as she ran her fingers through his hair, watching him sleep soundly. Sometime later, she glanced at the clock before closing her eyes too. It was nearly morning, and she too needed some sleep to prepare for the day. You should at least try hiding them. Qingwei scoffed at him, and then turned to look ahead on the road. Is it that bad? He chuckled and used the rear-view mirror, switching off the digital view to check on his neck, where several fading hickeys could still be traced out under his open-collared shirt. Yes, she glared at him. Do you know that all the girls in the class were gossiping about it the entire day? Some even felt heartbroken. Then there were the dumb ones who found it hard to control their hormones, and ended up saying some obscene things out loud. She informed him. Even Professor Jennifer was giving you lovelorn looks. And she's in her 50s, married, and with a daughter in high school. Oh, he put up a surprised expression and then nodded to himself. Well then, they must be wailing right now, since they saw us leave the university together. He turned to look at her and smirked devilishly. Pay attention on the road. Qingyue admonished him and then looked away, hiding her burning blush from his eyes. The rumors were true. You are a licentious person. Is that so? He chuckled at her words. In my defense, I only touch the beautiful ones. And as for the one I was with last night, I can only say to you that I love her with all my heart. Oomph. Keith drove the car in silence for nearly 5 minutes before the girl in the passenger seat could not contain her curiosity anymore. You were with Nana? She asked faintly. No, he shook his head. It was not her. His answer surprised Qingyue, and she turned to look at him, scrutinizing him with her gorgeous gray eyes. Your wife-to-be is in Magic City, so it must be your Angelini fiancé. She guessed. No. He shook his head at her words. I have not even kissed my Angelini fiancé yet. He revealed to her. So Amelia is here? She's not. He shook his head again. And I have not kissed her yet either. At it novel Benedette. Qingyue frowned at his words with mixed emotions in her heart. However, her mind was now running hard to guess who it must be whom Keith loved so dearly. Don't tell me that you are sleeping with your bodyguard, she asked in dismay. You make it sound like it is a bad thing. He raised his brow at her. Anyway, it was not her either. Though, I have kissed her a few times. She tastes just like cherries. I don't need that information. She loudly and clearly told him. Okay. He laughed lightly and raised his hands off the wheel in apology. Who was it then? She asked directly, no longer bothering to guess about the identity of this mysterious lady. I will tell you someday, and that someday is not today. Qingyue huffed at his words and folded her arms on her chest. At least, tell me if I know her or have seen her somewhere. She asked after some time. You know her. He put up a thoughtful front for a couple of seconds and then nodded to her. But I shouldn't have answered this question. Now you would always burn in curiosity every time you catch someone you know talking with me. Just you wait, mister. I will discover your secret lover one day, even if you don't tell me about her. Good luck with that. He waved his hand, brushing off her words, and she grew more determined as a result. Just you wait. The two of them spent the next hour bickering with each other on miscellaneous stuff, and then they arrived at their destination. Starlight Tower? He surprisingly looked at her when she directed him to enter the newest office tower in the city. Yes. She happily nodded. Mama and Mrs. Clark are childhood friends, and she asked her to give me an office here. And guess what? I have the entire 60th floor to myself. They just gave it to you like that? Renting it, or do you own it now? He curiously asked. Not renting. She shook her head. Apparently, Mrs. Clark owed Mama something, and this way she has now returned the favor. I do own it, but if I ever leave this place, I am just going to return it to the Clark family. Nice. Saved you around 30 million liras. He sighed and said, What's with the sigh? She frowned and asked, I own the 68th, 69th, and 70th floors, and unlike you, I had to pay for them. He complained. He did not tell her that he only had to pay half the price for the 3 floors, since both Demiliore and Clark's were family friends. However, it still cost him a little over 50 million liras. What? Qingyue looked at him in disbelief. You're going to have your office here? There was some hope in her heart that he would say yes, and when she saw him nod his head to her, Qingyue smiled happily. Guess we are neighbors then, she excitedly said. A happy coincidence. Yup, we are neighbors. Let's go inside. He smiled at her and suggested. MHM. Coincidence? Of course not. Keith knew that she will be having her office in this very building, and that was why he asked May to buy these floors. Otherwise, the Demiliore family owned several places that he could have used for his offices. However, this place was a special place too. Starlight Tower was an office tower situated in the new business square of Samran City. It was built by the Clark Group of Industries, had 75 floors, and stood over 400 m in height. It was a skyscraper that was a stunning sight to behold. Needless to say, it was one of the hottest properties in the city, and the price and the rent was just as astronomical. The security of the building allowed the car in the private parking after recognizing the number plate, and the two entered the private lifts that connected to all the floors in the building. Unlike the general parking lot and the general lifts, which were accessible to everyone, only the high-ranking officials in the Starlight Tower had access to these lifts. Qingyue showed him around the 60th floor excitedly, and expressed over and over again that she could not wait to get started with her company. Later, she made him show his office too, and Keith, who had never been here before, had to make a call to Aunt May to send someone to get him. Luckily, May was present in the building and came herself. "Why do you need 3 floors?" she curiously asked when she found only 1 floor active. "The 70th floor is my personal office. That's where the meetings of the group will take place. The 69th floor is for my real estate company, which will include construction and architecture, and the 68th floor is for my IT company." He revealed to her. "You're going to enter the IT sector?" she asked in surprise. "Yup, already have the plan set up, and I'm sure that it will be a successful venture." He smiled at her and then led her to the main office on the 70th floor, where she could find him in the future. "The layout isn't much different than my place, but the view is certainly better," she commented as she looked through the glass wall. "Same Ran is beautiful, isn't it?" she smiled and asked. "True." He stood by her side and gazed at the overcast sky before looking at the faraway snow-capped peaks. Yes, it was rightfully one of the most beautiful cities in the world. "Hungry?" He turned to her and asked. "Not really. You?" "I am famished." He pitifully looked at her. "I had a long night, you know, and we had extra classes today." "Oomph." Qingyue angrily stomped her foot on the floor and started walking out of the office. "Let's go. I know a place nearby," she called out to him. Keith handed the key of the car to her, and Qingyue drove them to a famous continental restaurant. He didn't have anything particular in mind, but after looking through the menu, he decided to go for the French cuisine today, focusing on wine, duck, and beef. Qingyue wasn't too hungry, but decided to help herself to a good meal. She went for the Italian cuisine and chose a simple lasagna and also picked a dish with a veal cut and marrow-filled bone. And since she was a little mad at Keith, she chose the most expensive wine they had in the house. Keith did not say anything about it, and only chuckled at her, which irked her some more. But soon he engaged her in a happy conversation about the current business affairs of the world, something Qingyue really enjoyed. As he was the gentleman, the waiter cleverly handed him the bill, and Keith did not even look at it and paid for everything with his card, leaving a good tip to the group of waiters that had served them the lunch. When they arrived outside the restaurant and got back in the car, he looked at his watch and smiled. "Shall I drop you home?" he asked. "Yup. Mom would like to see you too, and I also want to see how you fare against my grandfather in chess." She smirked at him. "It will have to wait another day." He chuckled. "I have to head to the airport after dropping you home." "You're going out of the city again?" "No." He shook his head as he started the engine. "Amelia is coming, and I'm going to pick her up," he told her. "Want to come along?" Qingyue frowned a little, but then shook her head. The drive to the Lin mansion was a silent affair, and as soon as they arrived, Qingyue was ready to rush out of the car, but Keith stopped her, holding her hand. "Thank you for accompanying me today, Miss Lin." He raised her hand and planted a kiss on her knuckles. "I enjoyed every moment of it, and forgive me for not telling you this earlier. You look gorgeous today," he said to her with a sincere yet a devilish smile, and Qingyue felt her cheeks warm up. "I will see you tomorrow. Now go. Don't keep your wife waiting." She smiled at him and then exited the vehicle. Keith chuckled to himself as he watched her enter the mansion, and then he drove away, heading straight for the airport. There was less than an hour left in her arrival, and he did not want to be late to receive her. Keith did not want to wait at the arrivals with so many people around. He had asked May to make the arrangements, but it still took him a few minutes to get the gate pass and go through the security checkpoint to be allowed to wait at the arrival gate. He stood there with his hands behind his back, keeping his eyes at the passageway, waiting for her arrival. The flight had safely landed a few minutes ago, but the passengers had not been allowed to disembark yet. As soon as the clock hit 1800, the first batch of passengers disembarked the plane. People curiously looked at the ridiculously handsome young man with interest, and when they saw the stemmed red rose in his hand, they sighed in their hearts. A few people even nodded at him in a greeting even though they were not familiar, but Keith politely nodded back to them with a light smile, showcasing his confidence and demeanor that attracted even more attention. He could feel the eyes of the young girls, and even some women boring into him, but he was not particularly bothered by it. Yes, he was ridiculously charming, and the opposite sex wanted to know him better, but unfortunately for most, his charm made them feel conscious and insecure about themselves, and thus he was seldom approached by girls who wanted to get close to him. The people nearly stopped and stared when his lips curved into a perfect smile that dazzled them, but soon they discovered the reason behind that smile. Keith did not care about anyone and started walking to the girl who had finally appeared in the passageway, gracefully walking towards him with her tall, slender legs, dragging a small bag behind her. She was still wearing her glasses, with her hair tied in a bun, wearing a plain jeans and a baggy crewneck sweater. However, even in something as simple as that, she was breathtakingly beautiful. "I missed you," he said as soon as he wrapped his arms around her and lifted her up, twirling around before putting her back on her feet. Amelia did not resist him at all, and even hugged him back. She closed her eyes contently when she felt his lips press on her forehead, and a comfortable feeling washed over her, bringing a light smile to her thin lips. "For you." He grinned when he saw her smile, and then presented her the flower he had prepared for her. "Thank you." Amelia accepted it from his hand and courteously smelled it, and when she looked back at him, her eyes were fixed on his neck, where a couple of hickeys were marking him. Before things could get awkward, Keith cleverly took her bag and then grabbed her soft hand, leading her outside with him. "It's quite light," he remarked as he guessed that she had not brought much in the bag. "It's mostly the things I need for work, and a few necessities," she indifferently said. "I thought you were planning on staying with me for a long time." He teased her, "And I thought that my husband would take me out on shopping for the things that I might need." She looked him in the eyes and smiled when she saw surprise wash over his expressions. Keith was really surprised that she made a playful remark, but then grinned and leaned near her ear. "Anything for you," he whispered, and then planted a kiss on her ear. "Let's go now." "Not today." She shook her head. "Take me home for now. I did bring some clothes for a couple of days. Tomorrow then, or maybe the day after." Keith did not insist and nodded, complying with her words. "I will take you out and show you our office tomorrow." MHM. He deliberately drove slower and took the longer route back home so that she could take her time looking around the city. "Is that Ying in the black Audi that's following us?" she curiously asked as she looked in the side mirror. "Yes." Keith nodded to her. "So, what do you think of Samran? It's lively here, pleasant weather and snow. Much bigger and just as beautiful as the Magic City." She smiled and replied to him. "I do want to visit the old town and see all the heritage sites to reach a conclusion. I will take you to see the Samran Castle when we go for shopping." He nodded to her with a bright smile. It was good that she was comfortable having a chat with him since he knew that she preferred silence. "What happened to your hand?" she casually asked. He was still wearing a soft glove on his left hand, so it was not a surprise that she picked up on it. "An accident with a poison-lace kunai." He chuckled and answered her. "But it's all good, nearly healed, and the scars will fade away in a couple of weeks." "Bastille?" She frowned and asked. "Yeah, you never told me what you went there for." "No, I did not." He sighed and then smiled. "Got myself a capable subordinate and the cutest maid you will ever see." "So you risked your life to get yourself a capable subordinate?" She raised her brow and asked. "It was an accident, and everything was under complete control." He told her. "I thought you were a wise man," she lightly said, and then looked out the window, staring at the faraway hills with snow-capped peaks. It was an hour-and-a-half long drive before they arrived at their destination. The Demiliore estate was on the northern outskirts of the Samran city, situated right next to the famous Agnolian Hills. "Welcome home," Keith smiled and said as soon as they entered the gate of the Demiliore estate. Amelia looked around curiously at the surrounding forest, which continued for the next 10 minutes, and then they appeared in a clearing with gardens on the two sides, several houses, more gardens, and then they arrived at a majestic-looking palace. There was a huge aquarius fountain, a mermaid with a gourd in her hands, right in front of the manor. It was lit up in complementary colorful lights, and she couldn't help but stare at it. However, She soon discovered a few people waiting for them at the portico and schooled her expressions. "Your mother?" she asked as she looked at the beautiful lady, who was standing next to an aged man. Vanessa could have easily been mistaken for Keith's older sister, but Amelia knew that he had no older siblings. And if she guessed right, the man next to his mother should be the revered Reiser Demiliore. "Yes." Keith nodded to her. "And my grandfather is next to her." He drove the car right into the portico, and a butler rushed forward to open the door for him and accept the keys of the car. "There's a bag in the boot. I need it delivered in my room." "Yes, young master." The butler politely bowed to him. Keith walked around the car and then opened the door of the front seat, taking Amelia's hand and helping her out of the car. He smiled in his heart when his wife confidently locked her arm with his and walked forward with him to greet his family. "Good evening, Master Demiliore." She politely bowed to the aged man, and when Reiser nodded to her, she turned to look at Vanessa. "Good evening, Lady Vanessa." She bowed to her too. Reiser smiled when he saw her confidence and making no attempts to flatter them. Even if Caesar had spoken highly of this lady to him, he could not help but still be impressed by her demeanor. His grandchild had picked a wonderful life partner, and he was relieved about it. "You can call me mother from now on." Vanessa stepped forward and hugged her daughter-in-law. "His words did not do justice to you, my sweet daughter. You are beautiful." She cupped her cheeks and looked right into her eyes behind those glasses. "Thank you, mother," Amelia politely replied with a smile. "It's an honor to be called beautiful by one as beautiful as you. It is a blessing that Keith has taken after you." Vanessa giggled at her words, but she was not really smiling in her heart. She had just found out that Amelia was not bothered by her presence. It was just as if her beauty and identity did not make her anxious, but it was not something that Vanessa felt was necessarily bad. It could be a welcome change in the family, but she was still a little vigilant against this girl who was so hard to read through. "Come, I will introduce you to everyone." Vanessa grabbed her by the arm and then turned to look at those who had been waiting. "This is Sybil, my shadow." The silver-haired woman bowed to her. "This is May. She's currently Keith's secretary, and she is Caesar's wife." The aged woman in a business suit politely bowed to her future boss. The young man next to her is Sebastian, her son. He's Keith's right-hand man now and the heir to his father's position. The next in line were Caesar and Victor, whom she was already familiar with, and then Vanessa introduced her to the ladies in uniforms. "This is Viola, and she will be your personal maid from today." "It is an honor, Lady Amelia." Viola stepped forward and bowed to her. She was an aged woman, well-kept, well-trained, with dark eyes and hair, olive skin, and distinctive Native American features. Adet novel Benedat. Viola has been Keith's personal maid since he was a baby, and she's also a skilled linguist and taught him Latin, Italian, Spanish, French, and Russian. You can ask her if you want to learn any of those languages. Vanessa informed her. "I do wish to learn them." Amelia was not the one to miss out on such an opportunity and nodded to Vanessa's words. "It will be my pleasure, Lady Amelia." Viola smiled at her and nodded. Now this cute little girl next to Viola is Minami. She's Keith's new personal maid. Vanessa gently smiled at the Japanese girl who fidgeted a little as she stepped forward and bowed to Amelia. He was not wrong when he called you the cutest little maid. Amelia could not help but smile at the innocent little girl. Minami looked at Viola inquisitively, and the latter conveyed Amelia's words through the sign language to her. There was an adorable blush on her face as she bowed to Amelia again to thank her for her words, which prompted the people around her to lightly laugh at her cuteness. Amelia understood from their interaction that Minami could not hear, and she did not raise this question to not come out as insensitive about this matter. She stepped forward and gently pulled on Minami's cubby cheeks, and smiled some more when the little girl blushed furiously. "I never learned the sign language," she said, and her new maid immediately caught up on her meaning. "It isn't hard, and a few weeks would be enough to get a grasp on it. We will start our lessons from tomorrow," Amelia told her. "Yes, my lady." Viola bowed to her. Despite coming from a family whose culture and customs were quite different, where they never had any servants to take care of them, she still possessed an inborn demeanor of an aristocratic lady. If they did not know better, They could have easily mistaken her for some princess, and Vanessa was glad that her daughter-in-law would not need time to get accustomed to their lifestyle. Come, I will show you around the place. Vanessa happily led her inside the place, followed by Sybil and Viola, leaving the rest of them standing outside. Vanessa likes her, Reiser commented, and then chuckled at Keith. Lucky you. Keith laughed at the playfulness of his grandfather. And what do you think? He curiously asked. She is special. You are not wrong about it. Well-mannered, modest, confident, graceful, and most importantly, she's beautiful. Reiser said, honestly, I was half expecting an excited girl with a lot less grace. That's how those girls from ancient families usually are. You have a good eye, little one. Thank you. Keith was happy about the compliment of his grandfather, and then checkmate. Amelia planted her knight on f5, trapping Keith's king form all sides with the help of her queen, bishop, and rook. Keith kept staring at the board for a while, trying to process every ring that had just happened. He was not going easy on her since he knew how fierce her chess skills were, but still, how he got played by her on the board was too much of a shock for him. I'm going to log it in. And she rubbed some more salt on his wounds, picking up his logbook and making the first entry of their match. His current chess skills were advanced tier, close enough to the expert tier, and for Amelia to toy with him from the very first move, she was bound to, at least, possess master tier chess skills. Want to play again? She smiled lightly and asked. Sure. He was not the one to back down and nodded to her, helping her reset the board. This time, he stayed alert and played much more cautiously, dragging the game for over 10 minutes, but eventually he still lost it. Keith helplessly smiled as he watched Amelia log her second victory in the book. Again? She asked. Sure. And they were at it again and again. Keith lost 7 games consecutively before Amelia stopped asking for more. Let's call it a day. She reset the board and then stood up, walking to the dressing room. You have improved a lot in the last 2 games. She commented before she closed the door behind her. Thanks. He chuckled and shook his head. Yes, he was a little depressed after losing 7 games, but at the same time, he was excited that he had another competitor whom he could not beat. It roused his desire to improve, and he did not care if he would have to lose 100 games to her to get his first win. All he cared about was beating her at it fair and square. Keith realized that he possessed a system that could help him improve on any of his skills, but he did not want to solely rely on it. He had always been a fast learner who found learning new things quite enjoyable. He wanted to learn a few skills on his own and improve on his existing skills as much as he could in the time he had, and decided to only take aid of the system when it becomes necessary. He stood up from his seat and walked up to the study table, opening his laptop and logging into May's brokerage account. He could not have his own account since he had not graduated yet, and Keith did not want to involve any stockbrokers in the investments he planned on making. Luckily, May was a registered stockbroker at the Netherian Stock Exchange, and she handed her details and account to him to use as he pleased. It was 18th of December, 2040, and tonight a certain cryptocurrency was at its lowest value in several years. However, it would sharply rise for the next 100 days for as much as 5 times the original value before taking the inevitable dip. For anyone else, it would have been a risky venture, but Keith knew all the ins and outs, knowing exactly when he had to pull out his investment to make the most profit. However, he had to be very careful with it, as it was not something he could very heavily invest in. Otherwise, the pattern of its value would see unforeseen changes. There was no need to be too greedy, but he did not have to be modest either. At exactly 2330, he bought the cryptocurrency worth 420 million liras. He knew that even if his investment caused some fluctuations in the market value, it would not be enough to derail it from the projected path. He was ready to only get a return of 4 times his investment instead of 5, as that would earn him nearly 2 billion liras, which was a huge sum. He looked at his remaining balance and sighed. Yes, he still had more than 100 million in his account, but it was the first time in his life that he felt like he did not have enough money in his hands. Sebastian was utilizing the 800 million liras he had given to him to secure the land, and Keith was hopeful that he would not need more of it. In case things turned out differently, he would simply ask his mother to give him some money. He had already handed over the operating costs of the companies to May, and things would run smoothly for the next 6 to 7 months. It was enough time for him since he would have a lot of money in his hands by then. Thinking of this, Keith decided to test out his expert tier stock flipping skills, picking up several decent stocks that would offer him immediate gains. He did not spend a lot of money on these investments since he was just testing himself out and continued to play in the stock market for the next 4 hours. Amelia had returned hours ago after freshening up, and she had been meditating for the last couple of hours on the bed. When she opened her eyes and still found him sitting at the study table, she could no longer contain her curiosity. She stood up and slowly approached him, leaning over his shoulder and looking at the screen that displayed all the numbers and graphs. "What are you doing?" she asked, even though she could see what he was doing. "Making money." He smiled at her and then returned his attention back to the screen. "At it novel been at. Any luck?" "Yup." He nodded his head. "Made 2 million in the last 3 hours. His words surprised her, and she looked at the screen with a lot more interest than before. However, she could not understand anything she saw on it. "Do you plan on spending the entire night on it?" "No, I am done." He smiled at her and closed on his last investment before logging out of the account. Keith was pleased to discover that he had gained a better understanding of stock exchange after spending all these hours on it, and he wanted to make it a regular thing to improve on his stock flipping skills. "Let's go to bed." He closed his laptop and picked up his wife in a Princess Carry. Amelia shied her eyes away from him, but did not really refuse him for anything. He was her husband, and he could do whatever he desired with her. But to her relief, he did not plan on doing much tonight. He laid her down on the bed and then climbed onto it, laying right next her before he turned to her and looked right into her emerald eyes. "Do you like the place?" he softly asked. "It's a beautiful home." She smiled at him. "And my family?" He smiled at her and asked. "You are blessed, you know." "I know." He chuckled and nodded. "Do you miss your parents?" Amelia stayed silent as she kept smiling at him for a good minute. "I was only 3 when they passed away. It has been over 2 decades now. Yes, there were moments when I wished I still had them around, but now I feel no such desire." She told him. "What about you?" Keith knew that she was asking about his father, and he closed his eyes before taking a deep breath. "I saw him die right in front of my eyes, and I was quite depressed for several months." He informed her. "But my mother never really made me feel like I needed him in my life. I may have sometimes wished he was still around, but now, quite frankly, I am glad that he is dead. He would have harmed my family even more had he lived." Amelia frowned at his words. Keith knew that she was not aware of what exactly had transpired all those years ago, and he decided to tell her everything he knew about it. "What would you have done had you been in his shoes?" she asked after she listened to everything. "I would have never decided to give up on my family who loved and needed me just for some woman, no matter how much I loved her." He unhesitatingly answered her question. "But if I were in his shoes, things would have been a lot different." "How so?" "I'm not as weak as him." He smiled at her. "I would have used force, not caring about all the blood I would have had to shed, even if you had to kill the woman you loved." She smiled and asked. "No." He chuckled and shook his head. "Not if she loved me back and was sincere. In that case, I would have hidden her from the public, even if it meant caging her in a dungeon." "You are selfish too," she pointed out and smiled when she found him not bothered by her remark. "But yes, you would not abandon your family. There's nothing more important than family to me." He truthfully said. "I want to meet your lover, and the girl named Qingwei that Mother told me about. I guess you two talked about a lot of things after dinner." He sighed and asked. "She told me a lot about you, and the people who surround you." She smiled at him. "She told me that you like Qingwei. I want to meet the people you would add in our family one day. You see, just like you, I won't allow someone to harm my family too." "Is that so?" He mischievously smiled at her and planted a kiss on her forehead. "Are you planning on declaring your sovereignty over me? You can think of it that way. After all, I am your first wife." She did not deny his words, but Keith knew that she was not a woman who envied anyone. "I promise you, I would never bring someone into our family who would harm us," he seriously said. "We shall see," she softly said. "Things never go as planned, not even if you know everything." He could not really deny her words and just wrapped his arms around her, closing his eyes and resting his head back on the pillow. Amelia leaned in, snuggled in his embrace, and closed her eyes too. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night, love." He planted a kiss on her head and gently stroked her back, helping her fall asleep faster. It did not take long for him to lose himself to her warmth and enter the world of dreams as well. Qingwei kept glancing at the handsome boy who was sitting across her in the library. She knew that he was working on something concerning his new IT company, but it had already been 3 hours since they arrived here when their classes ended. She herself had some work to do, and she had just finished it. However, Keith was still working seriously on his project. She was curious what exactly it was about and was tempted to walk over and check up on his work, but she did not want to pry into his official matters without his permission, as that was considered unethical. Of course, she would ask him about it later, and he could choose to give her as much information as he liked. Her eyes drifted to the clock once again, and she frowned when she saw that it was nearly 2 p.m. She deliberated if she should inform him that they were going to run late, but decided against it. At exactly 2 p.m., Keith closed his laptop and packed it in his bag. "Are you done?" He lazily stood up and stretched his back a little, which made the gray-eyed girl smile at him. "I should be the one asking you that question, mister." She folded her arms on her chest as she walked up to him. Keith wryly smiled at her question and just nodded to her. "What were you working on?" she asked straightforwardly. "May sent me an analysis of the current social media apps, and I was just going through the details and made notes for what I needed and did not need in my project." He informed her. "You're going to start a new social networking service?" "Yes." He nodded to her. "It will be called Memoir. And what is going to be its focus?" She curiously asked. "That's a secret for now." He chuckled and shook his head, which prompted her to pout. However, she did not insist on asking for details and picked up her bag to follow him out of the library. "Your friends don't mind that you have been neglecting them for the last couple of days?" He smiled at her and asked. She had been sitting at his desk with him in the class, and even after their classes, she accompanied him to the cafeteria and sat with him. "They don't." She smiled brightly. "They even want me to spend more time with you, and one has been pestering me to introduce her to you." "And why have you not fulfilled her wish?" "She's not your type." She shook his head. "I don't need her to be my type. I have no such intentions." He mischievously smiled at her. "And how do you know what my type is?" "You have no such intentions, but she is looking for something more than just becoming your friend." Qingwei snorted. "And it isn't hard for me to see what type of girls you like." "Oh." He surprisingly looked at her. "Do tell me what type of girls I like." "Modest, innocent, shy, well-mannered, and of course beautiful. Girls you can easily control." "You make it sound like I am some sort of control freak." He complained as he understood that she was talking about Nana. "Are you not?" She looked at him in surprise. "I am." He smirked at her, not denying her words. "But no, I don't just like the girls whom I can control. I also feel attracted to the ambitious, graceful, sophisticated, highly intelligent, and independent women. However, yes, you are right about the modest part. I don't like girls who love to flaunt their skin for the opposite sex to feast their eyes on them." "MHM." Qingwen nodded to his words and looked away. She could feel that he was referring to her when he said that he felt attracted to ambitious, graceful, sophisticated, and highly intelligent women. "I guess that kills all the chances for my dear friend." She giggled. "Oh, is she the one that loves wearing those short skirts, flashing her ton legs, even in winters?" "You said you don't feel attracted to such girls." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Doesn't mean that I don't notice them. She's pretty," he admitted, "but not someone I would ever date. Also, James is quite interested in her. He has no chance." Qingwei immediately shook her head. "Poor him." He shrugged and dropped the subject. The two of them talked about miscellaneous stuff and arrived at the parking lot where Keith's carbon gray Koenigsegg Gamera was parked. "May I drive?" Qingwei asked after she interestedly looked at the ride. "Here." He handed her the key after unlocking the doors and hopped into the front seat. They arrived outside the Samarin High School, where Nana was already waiting for them, surrounded by a few of her classmates. As soon as Keith stepped out of the car, a few girls squealed, attracting all the attention. And Nana burned in a furious blush after she caught him brightly smiling at her. She timidly walked into his arms right in front of everyone, and then waved goodbye to her class fellows before getting in the back seat of the car. You did not need to get out of the car, she complained as soon as she got inside. He loves to flaunt. Qinghua snorted and started engine. Good afternoon, Miss Lin. Nana turned a little stiff when she realized who was present in the car with them. Come on, just call me Qinghua. She smiled at her. And good afternoon, Nana. Let's go. Keith closed the door and said, and then looked at Qinghua. And no, I don't like to flaunt. I just like to declare my sovereignty over everything that belongs to me. Isn't it the same thing? Qinghua snorted and started driving. So, where are we headed first? Office, Keith said. Amelia is there with May. Nana wanted to say something, but then turned quiet. Yes. Keith turned to look at her and smiled lightly. I'm still in my uniform, she timidly said. It isn't a problem, but let's head to your home first and you can get changed. We will wait downstairs. Thank you. Nana happily smiled at him. No worries, he said, and then entered the address to Nana's home on the GPS so that Qinghua would know the way. Thankfully, her home was on the way to their office, and so they didn't have to take a detour. Qinghua and Keith stayed in the car as Nana rushed inside the building and then came out 10 minutes later, wearing a dress with a sweater on top of it. You look pretty, he assured her as she hopefully looked at him, and she heaved a sigh of relief. Did you bring the files? He teasingly smiled at her when she opened the door of the car. Wait. Nana panicked and rushed back inside the building to get the files that she needed for the day. Isn't she the clumsy one? Qinghua giggled and shook her head. Q2, he chuckled with her. At exactly 3 p.m., they arrived at the Starlight Tower, half an hour late to their designated time. However, they were not really bothered about it. It was the first time for Nana in the office, and so Keith took his time showing her around before leading her to the 70th floor, where the offices were being furnished. He knocked on the door where he knew Amelia and May were, before entering with the two ladies. That's it for the property at the Georgian Street. Amelia was in the middle of a meeting with project developers, civil engineers, and the architects of their real estate company, which she was in charge of. She wrapped up the file in front of her and stood up, entering Keith's arms before nodding to the two ladies who had come with him. Qinghua was the first to step forward and drew her hand to Amelia, curiously looking at the lady over whom she had no apparent advantage. Lin Qinghua, Amelia Jane Demiliore. She lightly smiled at the gray-eyed girl and gave her name. Both Nana and Qinghua frowned at her use of the Demiliore name and felt uneasy in their hearts. However, the former braved herself and stepped forward. Good evening, Miss Amelia. I am Nana. She tried her best to stay calm and extended her forward. However, she was quite intimidated by Amelia's beauty and demeanor. It's a pleasure to meet you. Her attitude towards Nana was different than how she greeted Qinghua. It was way more amiable, and the timid girl felt quite at ease all of a sudden. Please be seated, she said to the two girls, who then took their seats at the meeting table. Keith greeted everyone in the room and then asked about the project they had just finalized. It was one of the projects on the properties May had bought and informed him about. What are your plans for the Area B? Amelia asked after everyone took their seats again. An entertainment plaza or a club to be exact. He revealed to her. What do you want in it? May asked. Underground parking, gymnasium, swimming pool, theater, private lounges, gaming lounge, arcade, karaoke bar, bowling alley, snooker and pool club, rooftop restaurant with the best view of the Dane Street, Madam Hopkins Park, and the 9th Junction. Keith revealed what he had in mind. It will be a high-end place, but affordable enough for high school students of the nearby schools. So we are targeting middle to high-income customers. A project developer took the notes and nodded. What type of gaming lounge are you looking for? Consoles, PC, and VR. A place large enough to hold gaming competitions in the future. We are not planning on selling this place. Our leisure and entertainment company will be in charge of it. So we'll make it the best place possible. If you have some more amenities in mind, do share your ideas. He said to the project development team, and then turned to look at Amelia. I need a design that will make the plaza stand out. Had it novel been at? She did not say anything and just smiled at him in reply. There will be no nightclub in the venue? Someone on the team asked. No. He shook his head. There's a nightclub on the other end of the street. The Melodona, someone said, and the rest understandably nodded their heads. It's one of the best, if not the best. Keith smiled in his heart, but did not say anything about it. He was not worried about competition, but why would he harm his own business? The Melodona would be under his control by this weekend. The project developers then discussed the new project among themselves, and a rough draft with speculated cost was formed. They did not say anything until the team left the office, and then proceeded to advise Keith. Young master, the project might not prove as profitable as we would like. The property is in a hot place, and if we construct a mall here, we could earn twice the profit. I'm not looking for a cash cow, Aunt May. He chuckled. As long as it is profitable, it doesn't matter how much we are making on it. Very well. She nodded her head and then took her leave. I will send the refreshments in. Thank you. Keith nodded to her. Nana followed May out of the office to show the files that she had worked on, leaving the three of them sitting back in silence. Amelia started working on her designs, and Keith also opened his laptop to play some more at the stock market. Qingwei tried to think of something to initiate a conversation with Amelia, but seeing her immersed in her work, she decided against it. Out of curiosity, she glanced at what Keith was doing, and then sat next to him, watching and learning from him as he flipped some stocks for a quick profit, bearing minimal losses. She had discovered yet another thing he was brilliant at, and she could not help but feel happy in her heart for some reason. Samran Palace, previously known as the Citadel on the Clouds, was situated in the heart of the Agnolian Hills by the Old Town. With its first foundation laid nearly 2,000 years ago, it was considered amongst the oldest palaces in the world and had been home to 3 different dynasties. After the passing of the last king of Samran, the palace was declared as a heritage site the day the city was assimilated in the Netherian Federation in 1606. And today, it was one of the most favorite tourist points in all of the country together with the Old Town, which was a market situated at the foot of the Agnolian Hill Range. Usually, people would prefer coming here in daytime, but the natives knew that the real beauty of the place could only be explored after the sun took its leave. There was no parking space in the Old Town, and so the 4 of them parked their car at the entry before walking inside on foot. They paid the entrance fee and the parking fee before they were allowed in the Old Town, and as soon as they closed in on the market, the hustle and bustle greeted them cordially. There's so many people here. Nana surprisedly looked around the tavern-like shops, lodgings, street food stalls, clothing shops mixed in with some handicraft points, all owned by the remaining indigenous Samaranian people who still lived in these hills around the palace. There were more than a dozen villages, and each was famous for its own craft. Let's check out the palace first, and then we will have our dinner here. Keith found a restaurant he was searching for and then pointed it out to the girls. You have been here before? Qingwei curiously asked. She never had a meal on the streets, and if she was being honest, she was a little concerned about the hygiene in this place. Yes, I have eaten in this place before. It was my grandmother who first introduced the Old Town to me, and I have come here a few times over RHE years. He informed them. The last time I was here was with the boys, a couple of months back after a car race. The alcohol here is good, and so is the food. There are no problems with the hygiene. Okay. Qingwen nodded her head and curiously looked around the place. It was the first time she was visiting this place, even if she was born and raised in Samran, and she had always wanted to see it someday. Her curiosity was shared by Amelia too, but they were not the only ones who were curious. Even though they were not dressed in anything flashy, their group still stood out amongst all the tourists because of their looks, and curious and appreciative glosses greeted them everywhere. A ridiculously handsome boy accompanying 3 beautiful fairies. How could it not attract the attention of the people? However, this place was quite peaceful, and the people were quite respectful. No one bothered them more than stealing glances every now and then. And some did secretly take a few pictures under the guise of shooting the market, but it did not bother them much. Keith and Qingwei were used to it. Amelia simply did not care about it, and Nana was too preoccupied looking around to pay attention to anybody. They walked for a couple of miles before they arrived at the stairway to the Samran Palace, and Nana excitedly hopped forward, trying to ascend the hill first. Keith and Qingwei chuckled at her antics, but did not show any haste. They caught up with the clumsy girl who was panting heavily, resting at the 40th stair. I guess you are not used to hiking. He playfully leaned near her face and nudged her nose with the tip of his finger. Nana embarrassedly lowered her head, but then looked back at him. I have never been here before. This place is beautiful, she said as she looked back at the stairway, which was lit up in yellow lights. Really? Keith curiously asked. MHM. Nana nodded her head. The stairs are so peaceful. I just wish it was a little less crowded, but it is still fun. He really did not know that she had never been here before, which meant that all the three girls were visiting this place for the first time. Well, you are in for a treat. Let's get going. We are halfway there. He urged the girl and helped her get up before pulling her up with him. Wow, Nana exclaimed when they finally reached the summit, coming face to face with the majestic Samran Palace that was lit up in yellow lights. There were a lot of people in the front compound, taking pictures or just sitting around on the benches chatting with each other. There were even street vendors selling refreshments and snacks, and the security was quite strict here compared to that of the old town. The inside of the palace was restricted, and if you wanted to see it, you had to pay a fairly high fee for it, 200 years per person for a time limit of 3 hours. They were offered a guide at the reception, but Keith refused it, taking it upon himself to show the girls around the place. Throne room, hallways, ballrooms, armory, royal kitchen, watchtowers, courtyards, courtroom, cellars, and then the royal chambers. Keith showed them everything, giving them pieces of history as he introduced each place. He even knew the history of some of the statues and artworks in the palace. And what he knew the most about were the stones that were used to build the place and the thought that was put behind the designing of the roofs. The place had been preserved as much as possible, and so it was pretty much just like how it had been during the time of the last king of Samran. Well, there was no electricity back then, so the place must have looked quite different at night all those centuries ago. However, the lights were cleverly disguised in form of lamps which did not take away the immersion of the tourists and gave a profound experience of the palace. Nana was simply awestruck by everything. Qinghua was happy at finally getting a chance to see this place, and Amelia was the one who took the most time looking around at everything. Nana and Qinghua took a few pictures of the place, and then they asked a fellow tourist to take a couple of pictures of their group to save this memory. Each of them did not like taking selfies, and so they were not behaving like others who pulled out their phones to take a picture with every statue they came across. The architecture is wondrous, isn't it? Qinghua finally could not play the silent games with Amelia and decided to start a conversation with her for the first time in the day. It is indeed wondrous, considering the fact that this place is over millennia old. Amelia nodded her head. And it must have cost a fortune to build this place in those times, not to mention decades of work and effort to make it look like this. I see that you love your work. The gray-eyed girl smiled at her, and the emerald-eyed girl simply nodded her head. Keith told me that you were planning on operating a cosmetics and fashion company. That's right. Qinghua nodded her head. Would you help me out with shopping after dinner? She smiled and asked. I have never bothered with branded attires, but since I am going to represent the Demiliore family, I need to have some good idea about it. Sure. Qinghua happily agreed to her request. Lucky for you. I know what types of outfits Keith would love on the woman who belongs to him. She mischievously spoke. Oh, is that so? Keith chuckled and asked. Yup. She nodded her head and then winked at him. I will make sure that your wife only picks the modest clothes, Mr. Control Freak. Now, this is getting personal. Keith played along with her and feigned some dissatisfaction, which she caught on to. Humph. You admitted it yourself, she reminded him. But who told you I would only love to see her covered up? He teasingly smiled at her. She's my wife, you know, and inside our chambers, where we're all alone, I would love to see her in the bare minimum. At it novel Benedette. I don't want to know that. She immediately cut in, but Keith wanted to tease her some more. Have you ever tried on the lingerie by Medusa? He smirked at her. I know a lot about it, and can even help you pick some articles. However, the reaction he was expecting did not come, but instead, Qinghua narrowed her eyes at him. So it was true. What? Keith raised his brow at her. You slept with Irina Sylvia, the hottest model of Medusa's Secret, 3 months back when she was in Samran for a show. She told him rather than ask him about it. I did. He nodded his head. But what does that have to do with my knowledge about Lingier? He curiously asked, ignoring the narrowing eyes of the girls. Didn't you learn about everything just to woe her? She smirked at him. Do you think I need to woe the girls with such means? He surprisingly looked at her. Have you seen a more handsome man than me? She was the one who offered herself to me, and I took her on that offer for a night. I did not even give her my contact when she asked for it. He informed her. For some reason, Qingwei was at a loss of words. What he said was indeed true, and given how ridiculously handsome he was, it was not impossible that Irina was the one who took the initiative. So you slept with a woman who casually offered herself to you. Keith felt a chill run up his spine when he heard those words from the mouth of Amelia. However, he still kept a polite smile on his face. It was a one-time thing. He said, Good. I don't want to learn that you have been sleeping around with women who have no respect for their bodies. She straightforwardly said, much to his surprise. It would be rude to not accept the offer if the girl is beautiful. He smiled in his heart, but lamented through his words. I am serious, my dear husband. She spoke her words devoid of any emotion, and Keith felt bells of crises ringing in his head. Okay, no sleeping around with models, actresses, singers, or just any girl who is ready to casually sleep with me. He raised his hands in surrender. None of the girls liked the way he worded his answer, but they did not say anything about it. Keith smiled when Amelia nodded her head, and then he grabbed her hand and squeezed it lightly. You know, I'm not really attracted to women who are casual about sleeping with any man they find attractive. And yet you sleep with them. Qingwei looked him in the eyes. I just needed someone to satiate my lust that night. He shrugged his shoulders. Nana frowned at his words, and then subconsciously stepped forward, grabbing his free arm and squeezing it, reminding him of her presence by his side. Even if she did not say anything, Keith understood what she meant to convey to him. She wanted him to know that he had her if he needed to satiate his lust in the future. There was no need for him to sleep around with casual women. He planted a kiss on her cheek, which made her blush, and then the four of them walked back to the old town to have their dinner. 2 of your special rice, 2 roasted ducks, the 6 sauces, and we would like to first have your special chicken broth soup, for servings. Keith placed the order to the pair sisters who were cutely dressed as waitresses. I do hope you still have the roasted duck for us. He amiably smiled at them, which made the older girl blush. We have 6 left. The little one, who was around the age of 9, cutely told him. Good. He chuckled and tapped her head. That will be all. Would you like to have spring water with your order, or the bottled water? The older sister asked. Keith glanced at Qingwei and then smiled at the waitresses. A jar of spring water and a bottled water. Your order will be served in 30 minutes, and we will bring you the soup in 5 minutes. The 2 sisters bowed to them and took their leave. Why did you ask if there were any roasted ducks left for us? Nana raised the question after the sisters left. That is because the roasted duck of this place is perhaps the best in the world. He smiled at her. Well, I haven't tested one better than theirs. Is it really that tasty? Qingwei skeptically asked. You will taste for yourself. Keith chuckled. Madman's Duck is a family-owned restaurant that has been in operation for over 100 years, and their most prized dish is their roasted duck. They raise their own ducks, carefully breeding them and keeping a check on their diet. It costs them a lot, and so they only serve 25 ducks each day. And do you know how much one of these roasted ducks cost? How much? The gray-eyed girl asked. 444 nearest. He grinned when he saw the shock on her and Nana's faces. And they managed to sell all 25 of their ducks every day. That explains why we have such a sophisticated company inside the tavern. Amelia smiled as she played with her phone, looking at some information. Her words prompted the other 2 girls to look around, and they finally realized that everyone inside the tavern was dressed properly, and the more they observed the people around them, the more they understood the type of customers visited this place. Bureaucrats, businessmen, other high-ranking officials, doctors, and some well-off and famous people. The elites of the society. Mostly older generation. Keith informed them. The 1-2 tables across from us is Jelion Greg. The Jelion Greg? Qingwei gasped and carefully stole a glance at the table. Keith subtly pointed to where an old man with rimmed glasses and shabby beard sat, talking to a couple of other men of his age group. Yes, the Gillian Greg, the famous painter and the owner of Appendier Art Gallery. He nodded to her. Now you see why this place is more than what it looks like. Mom's a big fan of his work. Qingwei smiled and informed him. If I be honest, I would say Aunt Celine's own work is better than his. But then again, art is subjective. He shrugged and smiled. She would be ecstatic to hear what you have just said, and I will pass your words to her. She delightedly smiled, proud of her mother's work being acknowledged by someone whom they both considered special. The little waitress served them 4 bowls of soup and patiently waited as all 4 of them tasted and gave her their remarks. It's delicious. Amelia gently smiled at her. Thank you. Please enjoy your meal. The little girl happily nodded to them and bowed before taking the leave. The warmth of the soup comforted their insides and served as a proper appetizer. They wanted more of it as soon as they finished, but reined their hearts and patiently waited for their food. Their food arrived just before the 30-minute mark, and as soon as the girls looked at the roasted duck and they inhaled the appetizing smell of it, they could not help but salivate. At other times, they would have considered 2 ducks too much to finish, but as soon as they tasted it, their taste buds were ecstatic, calling onto the gluttonous demon they never knew existed in their stomachs. The sauces are nice too. You should try them. He was trying his best to not laugh at their behavior and pointed out that they are yet to taste the sauces. But the duck meat is just too perfect with the rice. I don't want to spoil it with the sauce. Nana tasted one out, which she did not quite like, and then continued eating without the sauces. Qingwei and Amelia did try all 6 and found a couple to their liking. The sauces were quite exotic and went well with the meal, which was perhaps one of the most fulfilling meals of their life. Qingwei and Nana stopped eating first as their little bellies could not handle more food, but Keith and Amelia kept eating until all the food was finished. The appetite of Amelia surprised the girls a lot, and they were curiously looking at her and her tummy that was still not bloated. Amelia did not bother explaining to them that it was because she was an auror that she had more appetite than the normal people. And Keith kept silent too, leaving the two to their speculations. However, he was sure that Qingwei would soon figure out the reason behind it. They stayed seated for a few more minutes, and then they finally stood up, walking up to the reception to pay their bill. Thank you for your patronage. The older woman who was responsible for managing the finances bowed to them. Where's the little girl who served us the food? Keith inquired. She's resting in the back room. The woman informed him. Shall I call her out? She asked, thinking that Keith perhaps wanted to leave her a tip. It's better if we meet her in the back room. He smiled at her, which made her curiously look at him. I have a gift for her. He gave an excuse. Please come with me. Amelia, Qingwei, and Nana were clueless about what Keith had on his mind and silently followed him. Arriving inside the back room, where the little girl was sitting together with her older sister, heaving a little. As soon as they saw them come in, the 2 waitresses stood up and bowed to them. Jenny, the respected customer wanted to see you before leaving, and he wants to give you a gift. The older woman informed her, which made the little girl curiously tilt her head. Come here. He gestured to her and then crouched down on one knee. Turn around, he said as soon as the little girl stopped in front of him. When was the last time you had a severe attack? He asked as he stared to undo the buttons on her top and then bared her back and the shoulders. The older woman wanted to stop him, but after hearing his question, she understood his intentions. You are a doctor? The little girl asked. The best there is. He chuckled. Do you mind if I lower your top some more? No. She embarrassedly shook her head. Since everyone else in the room was a female, she felt quite relaxed. You haven't answered my question. He reminded her as he lowered the top some more, bearing most of her back to him. 3 days ago, she started breathing rapidly as soon as he placed his palm on her back. Relax, he gently said. It might feel a little ticklish, but bear with it. She nodded her head. As soon as she calmed down, Keith placed both his palms on her back and channeled his aura. The little girl was an asthma patient, and it was getting worse for her lately. Everyone patently waited for Keith. Curiously looking at the little girl was trembling slightly with her eyes closed shut. Only Amelia truly understood what Keith was doing, and Qingwei was the other who could see his aura. She knew he was treating the little girl, but did not have any idea how he was doing it. Minutes passed, and the older woman returned to the reception. Keith continued with his treatment for over half an hour before he took his hands off the little girl's back. Done. He broke her out of the trance. Really, the little girl could feel that she could breathe more easily. However, it stung a little. The stinging sensation is quite weak and will vanish after a good night's rest, he assured her, and you will not have any attacks in the future. But you must still take precautions against pollen. He advised her. You are allergic to it. Okay. The little girl nodded her head and politely bowed to him after he helped her button her top. You're welcome. He gently patted her head and then smiled at the older sister who was looking a little anxious. There's no need to thank me, Mississippi. She's a sweet child, and I just wanted to help her. Thank you. Despite his words, she still bowed to him. You're welcome. He sighed and smiled at her before leaving together with the girls. The girls quietly followed him, glancing at his back from time to time as they walked out of the old town towards the parking area at Novel Benedat. So, you're a doctor, Amelia finally said, wearing a light smile on her lips. Yes. He chuckled and nodded as he opened the door of the car for her. It was quite nice of you, she said, and he just smiled at her in reply. What was her ailment? Chinwe asked after they entered RHE car. Asthma. Thank you for helping her, she sincerely said. Next time before I help someone, I will make sure that there are no people around. It's too tiring to hear everyone thank me for something. He complained, but all of them could discern that he was not really bothered by it. Oomph. Chinwe snorted. Don't pretend like you don't love the praise. You are a narcissistic man. Of course I love hearing all the praise, especially when it is from someone whom I am trying to impress. He teased her, decorating a beautiful blush on her fair cheeks. It's not so easy, mister. Aye. So where do you want to take us for shopping? He asked as he started driving the car. The Imperial, she told him. And I was hoping you guys would accompany me to the cinema after we finish our shopping. Sure. Keith readily agreed. Tomorrow was Friday, and they did not have the school as all the educational institutions of the country operated for 4 days a week from Monday to Thursday. But are you sure you can stay out for so long? He curiously asked. Mama knows that I am with you, so it won't be a problem. Chinwe informed him. I will book our tickets now. Which movie? Nana curiously asked as something popped up in her mind. Hansel and Gretel? Yes. The gray-eyed girl brightly smiled. I have so been waiting for it. The first show is at 12 a.m. Me too. Nana showed her excitement as well. Elizabeth Grey is so pretty. Her casting as Gretel is perfect. And so the two girls in the back seat started chatting merrily about the movie they wanted to watch tonight. Amelia and Keith got up early the next morning, getting only 3 hours of sleep after going to bed late at night. It was going to be a busy day for the two of them, and they spent a couple of hours after breakfast to prepare for it. Keith had his scheduled meeting with the IT team that he had formed for his company, and he was going to discuss the project memoir with them that held utmost importance to his plans of a future business empire. Amelia, on the other hand, was going to head the architecture team on designing the buildings for the projects she had approved yesterday. She did not really need anybody's help for that matter, but since she had people working under her, she wanted to make the most use of it as not every project needed to be designed specifically by her. After having a brunch at 11 a.m., the two of them left home together, arriving at the office just before noon. Amelia got out on the 69th floor, and Keith arrived at the 70th, going straight into the meeting room that had been furnished yesterday. Good afternoon, President. May and Nana, together with 5 other individuals, were already present and waiting for him. Good afternoon. Keith nodded to them and looked at each of them before allowing them to sit. Take your seats, all of you. He smiled inwardly at seeing the 5 members of his IT team sitting stiffly, obviously nervous about today's meeting. Just a few days ago, they were a bunch of unemployed lads trying their best to earn a living, and now, all of a sudden, they had a full-time job with a salary that they had never dreamed of in their lives. I won't bother with the introduction, as I am sure May has informed you of my identity. And rest assured that I know all of you and all about you. He lightly smiled, and for some reason, everyone felt a constriction on their hearts in his presence. Even May, who had known him since he was a baby, had never before felt this pressure oozing out of him. "Nana, start the slides," he commanded her, and his beautiful lover, who was dressed in a pantsuit today, immediately worked on a laptop in front of her, adjusting the light of the room and then starting the projector. Memoir. Keith called out the name as it appeared before everyone. A social space where we want the masses to spend most of their time at. That's our goal and the mission. He started off by introducing the idea to them, and then proceeded to explain it to the best of their understanding. Right now, we have social networks like MySpace, TimeTell, Reel, and Snapshot ruling the world, so we must offer services that they all lack and make our platform stand above all of them. We want to steal their users, and so we must offer the services similar to the ones that they provide. He had the memories from his dream about social networks that did not exist in this world, which were quite different from here. And he had worked meticulously on this project to make it something that will hook the users into it, taking advantage of all the information and memories, filling up the voids, and creating a masterpiece. Memoir will offer people a space where they can hold both public and private profiles at the same time from the same account. He informed them of the first key feature he needed and explained some more by showing them examples of the slides. Secondly, we will introduce the concept of snapshot videos of up to 30 seconds, allowing our users to express their talent and make a niche for themselves. Yes, it is similar to what the Reel is doing, but we will be providing our users with music dubs and better video editing and creating experience. We will also provide them a space to share their images with their audience and friends and family in private. John, that's your forte, and I need you to solely focus on it to make it work. He looked at the curly-haired plump man with glasses and told him his focus in the project. Sam, you will be responsible for creating the messenger for our application. It will be integrated inside the app, and I need you to make it something exciting with a good interface, which will provide the best text chat experience out there. We also need to work on the quality of our calling service. The two of them readily nodded their heads. Now, the most important part. Our interface, the search page, recommendations, and timeline. I need them all engaging, integrated in such a way that it won't be too complex for the user's experience. Of course, we need to make it attractive and focused on what our users want. Learn from the existing social networks and come up with a simple yet unique interface. He smiled and said, I will do it. A stout man with a mustache and short black hair accepted the task unhesitantly. Everyone on the table looked at him in surprise for his confidence. But Keith had known about it, and it was the very reason he had hired this man. Are you sure you can handle it by yourself, Mark? Keith smiled and asked. I am sure. Mark confidently nodded. How soon can you show me the results? Give me a week at tops. All right. I need the first draft by next Saturday. Keith nodded to him. He knew that if he had not hired Mark, the stout man would have come up with a social network of his own 5 years from now, and his project would have been purchased by a big IT company to be integrated with the existing MySpace. Next, I need the feature of background in-app music player. We will be hosting our sponsored music in our app, both audio and video, so that the users can enjoy music while spending time in the app chatting with their friends or surfing through the Explore section. And I also need a live streaming service on our app for the certified creators on it. He smiled at the woman with dark eyes and olive complexion with a stark beauty spot on top on her lip. You will be responsible for it, Kayla, and you will work with Mark to make space for it in the interface. Yes, President, she immediately said and shied her eyes away, trying to suppress the butterflies in her belly. Keith then proceeded to talk about minor, yet indispensable features that they needed in their app, and the team took notes of everything. He also provided them with existing examples where he could, and did his best to make them visualize what he had in mind. And lastly, Gary, he looked at the lanky black man with an afro, who gave off a lazy feeling even when he was trying to stay as attentive as possible. You will be the head of the team, responsible for assisting the team in their tasks, making sure that the team works well, and that this app functions properly. Contact May for whatever you might need to make this app. Now, I need a time frame from you. Gary nervously nodded as he felt that his task was the lowest. He had never before been in charge of anything in his life, but there was just something in Keith's tone that roused his desire to live up to his boss' expectations. And so he got over his nervousness and soon engaged the team in a discussion. Keith silently listened to their conversation, not interfering in it, and urged them to carry on whenever they felt like they were taking too much time, and looked at him apologetically. The team took nearly 2 hours to finally reach a conclusion. President, we need 7 months to make memoir. Gary stood up and informed him. Is that so? He lightly smiled at him. Well, if you can make it happen by the end of July 2041, I will give each one of you 2% stake in memoir. His words surprised them and made their hearts skip a beat. They could not be sure that their app will be able to stand out in the market, but for some reason, they felt compelled to believe in the ideas of Keith. And if things turn out the way he expected them to, they knew that 2% stake could one day mean hundreds of millions of nearest. But if you fail on your word, just 1%. Keith poured cold water on their excited nerves, making them all tensed about the situation. Now, they had something to lose, and they felt even more compelled to complete the task. It will be up and running by the end of July 2041. Gary assured him. Very well. Keith nodded and stood up. So, how do you like your new homes? Out at Novel Benedette. They are perfect, President. And the office is beautiful, too. Kayla smiled and informed him. I hope all of you will keep the legal bindings in your minds that you consented to when signing the agreements. Also, I expect the future managers of my IT company to be on their best behavior in the office. You can do whatever you want outside, but here, I need you to stay as professional as is required and expected of you. All of them nodded their heads, and the Keith wished them a nice day before leaving the meeting room. He arrived inside his personal office and sank in his seat, looking outside the glassed wall at the beautiful city. A few minutes later, Nana knocked on the door and entered the office, nervously standing in front of him. Yes, the IT team has left to start working on the project. The security head of the Starlight Tower has published passes to the workers on the 69th floor and has asked for a meeting when you have some free time. Give him an appointment for 5 p.m. He nodded to her. Yes. She nodded to him. Do you need anything, Mr. President? Yes. He smiled at her. Did you check the documents I mailed you in the morning? Yes. She nodded her head. I want you to process them and then arrange for an inauguration party of our group on Monday, 24th of December. It will also be the Christmas party, so do not slack off. Yes, President. She obediently nodded her head despite all her nervousness. She had no idea how she should arrange the party, but she knew that she could ask Aunt May to help her with it. Also, the next time you enter my office for official work, use the phone first. He reminded her of her position as a secretary and smiled when she trembled a little, realizing that she had already made a clumsy mistake. Yes, President. She nodded again. You may go now, he said to her, and turned his attention to his phone, which had started ringing a while back. As soon as Nana left the office, he stood up and walked over to the glassed wall before calling back to the girl who had just contacted him. Keith, hey, Alana, how are you? He smiled and greeted the overjoyed girl on the other end. I am fine. The cheerful girl on the other end happily informed him. And how is your little brother doing? He is doing fine now. Alana lightly said. I was really worried about him, but now he is getting used to the new place, and I can tell that he quite likes it here. That's good. You had your vocal assessments today. He guessed. Yes. She nodded. I asked Susanna to send you the recordings. Did you receive them? Let me check my mails, he said, and put the call on hold, opening the emails and checking for the said files. Yes, I have received them. I will listen to them tonight since I am at office right now. I'm sorry for disturbing you. She sincerely apologized. It's fine. I have some free time right now. He smiled and answered. Okay. Alana happily nodded. I have been trying my hands on some new musical instruments, and I think I want to explore the electronic music some more. It's fun, but I like the violin and cello too. Take your time to discover yourself. He nodded to her words and calmed her down a little. There's no need to rush, and you should focus on learning one first before try your hands on the next one. Susanna said the same thing. She told him, and he was glad that her manager was doing her job. And I think I will explore the electronic music some more first. You will do great. I know. He confidently said, I will listen to your recordings tonight and then write you a couple of songs that you can get started with. You don't have to. It's okay, Alana. Part of the reason why I offered you the job was so that you could make the songs that I write. Okay, then. But remember, I will not claim the songs for myself, and your name will be on them as their songwriter. I don't mind that. He chuckled and shook his head. Is there anything you need? No, Alana immediately said. Thank you for everything, Keith. It just all feels like a dream come true. It is a dream come true, silly girl. He chuckled some more and heard her giggle on the other end. Yup, it is. Also, I don't need your help for now. Susanna is managing everything well, and we're already working on converting the study into my personal music studio. I'm also free to use the music studio at the Silver Square. It's a wonderful place and has everything that one might need. I just can't wait to start making music. Good. He smiled at her enthusiasm and chatted with her for a couple of more minutes before ending the call. Keith kept looking at the city of Samran for a while, thinking about Alana and Yeshwan. At it novel been at. He had someone keeping an eye of the boy, and from what he had gathered, there were no signs of any abnormal behavior. It was a good news for him, since he was worried that his actions might have awakened the boy ahead of time. It was too much of a risk to deal with an immortal soul, even if the boy would have to start cultivating from the scratch. Checking the time displayed on the clock, he picked up his jacket and left the office, taking the lift to the 60th floor, where Qingyue was supposed to be overseeing the furnishings of the offices. His arrival distracted the workers who were assembling the place, but soon everyone returned to their tasks. Keith looked around the place for a while before he finally found Qingyue, who was in her office, watching the city just like he had been doing some time back. Yes, she called out when she heard the knock on the door, and turned around to find Keith entering her office. Hey, he smiled at her, and frowned a little when he found the girl's eyes quiver a little. Hey, Keith. She smiled at him, but he could see that her smile was a little stiff. I expected you to be out there, overseeing the work. He lightly said and walked up to her. The weather is nice today, he said as he watched the light snowfall. Is it? Qingyue nodded and then joined him in overlooking the city. They just kept standing right next to each other in a comfortable silence for several minutes. Is there something that upsets you? He gently asked, and Qingyue felt her heart skip a beat. No, she shook her head. Just didn't have a good night's rest. Slept late and got up early. Oh, Keith knew that she was making an excuse, but did not pry into the matter. Hungry? He asked. Just ate. She shook her head again, telling another lie that he saw through. Okay, if you need anything or just need to talk, do call me. He brightly smiled at her and started walking out of the office. I will see you in a while. As soon as the door to the office closes, her body trembled a little, and her beautiful gray eyes turned a little misty. She felt a little hollow inside of her after he left, something she did not like. And the rage that was at the tip of her nerves flared again, prompting her to immerse herself in her work to keep away the distracting thoughts. Keith knew that something was up with Qingyue, and he knew that she would not tell him about it if she did not want to. She was a little too hard-headed. He arrived outside the Starlight Tower and walked down the street to a place not far away before pulling out his phone and dialing a number. Keith. There was a sweet voice at the other end that greeted him. Good afternoon, Aunt Celine. He smiled. How are you? I am fine, she happily informed him. Qingyue told me you guys had a lot of fun last night. We did. He chuckled. Sorry for keeping your daughter away from home for so late. It's fine. Celine giggled. It was the first time she had stayed out for so late, but I wasn't worried since she was with you. Now tell me, how did you suddenly remember me? Something is up with Qingyue. Keith did not play around with his words. Her mood is off, and I get a feeling that she's not happy about something. Did something happen at home? What did she tell you? Celine stayed silent for a while before she asked. Nothing, he said, and heard her sigh at the other end. She had a little argument with her father in the morning. She informed him, and from her voice Keith could discern that Celine too was not in a good mood. It will be fine, Keith. You don't have to worry about it. Well, I hope they will sort out their differences. He nodded to her words. Take care of yourself, and please, don't stress about anything. Thank you, Keith. She sweetly smiled at his words. I'm working on a new painting right now. I will invite you to see it when it is done. I'll be there. He smiled and nodded before ending the call. As soon as the call ended, a devilishly handsome smile adorned his face. It was a good news for him that Qingyue was at odds with her father over something that could upset her to such an extent. And he had a hunch that it concerned him, which was an even better outcome for him. Keith finally found the shop he was looking for and entered it. Well, he had to do something about cheering up Qingyue, and he knew what she would like the most at this moment. Back in the Starlight Building, Qingyue was trying her best to focus on her work, but no matter how hard she tried, she failed. She already was upset about something, and now she was upset that Keith had just left her alone like that. She knew that she was being unreasonable, but she could not help resent him a little for not staying with her longer. Drowning in her thoughts, she did not even notice someone entering her office, and only when something was placed right in front of her did she look up. Keith. She frantically looked at him, worried that he had seen through her, but the smile on his lips calmed her down. "Brought you something that I thought would cheer you up," he said, and unceremoniously took his seat at her desk. "Slush." She frowned when she saw what he was holding and what was placed in front of her. "Yup." He smiled at her. "It's winter, Keith," she reminded him. "It's a fresh fruit slush. Healthy even in winters," he said, and started sipping it. Qingyue frowned and reached for it, and could not help but shiver at the cold touch. As skeptical as she was, she still took a sip, and her eyes widened in surprise. "Like it?" He mischievously smiled at her. "What flavor is this?" She nodded and asked. "My favorite." He chuckled and happily enjoyed his slush. "Tell me," she insisted. "Orange and strawberry mixed." He told her and saw her nod contently. Qingyue silently drank the slush she had never had before in her life, and even if they were both sitting there in silence, it was just too comforting for her. Her heart was a little too sweet, and all the dissatisfaction she earlier had against him just vaporized away. "I want more," she said as soon as she finished her serving. "Same. Let's go. I want some steak too." He nodded to her words and stood up, putting the trash in the bin and walking out of the office. Qingyue smiled brightly and picked up her trench coat before quickly catching up. "I think I would like a steak too," she said as soon as they entered the lift. Inside a royal blue-colored Rolls-Royce Phantom, two young men sat in the back seat, silently going through some files. The girl driving the car was solely focused on her job, wearing no expressions on her face. Right behind their car was an Audi, which belonged to her, but was currently occupied by two other guards of her master. "Good job." Keith handed back the files to Sebastian, who carefully put them inside a briefcase along with some envelopes. "Young master, Guzzo is not a man who can be intimidated," Sebastian reminded him. "Every man with a weakness can be intimidated, Sebs." He chuckled at the words of the young man and put the shades back on his eyes. "You just have to know how to exploit it to get what you require." "We are here, master," Ying said as soon as they entered the gates of Melodona Prime, one of the most expensive nightclubs in Etheria and even in all of the world. It was the heart of the Melodona nightclub chain, which had two other venues in the city of Samran, one of which was near the entertainment plaza Keith planned on making. The guards at the back door were already waiting for them, and the manager of the nightclub hurriedly stepped forward to greet Keith. "Welcome to the Melodona, young Master Demiliore." A tall man in his late 40s with short black hair and a robust physique greeted him. "I am Trevor, the manager of the Melodona Prime. I hope Mr. Guzzo is in the house." Keith nodded at him and asked. "He is expecting you in his office." The manager, who had a distinctive red scar on his left cheek, smiled at him. "Lead the way." Keith followed the man whose steps were quite calculated, evidence to the fact that he was someone possessing quite the skills. Of course, Keith knew the history of Trevor, an ex-soldier who later became a feared gangster before coming clean along with his master. Sebastian was walking side by side with Keith, paying attention to their surroundings, and behind them was Ying, who was wearing her favorite Jian sword on her back. Right behind her were Victor and Ryuda, who were silent and on high alert. Even if they all knew that odds of them getting harmed here were close to none, it was their job to always stay sharp to protect Keith, and they would not slack on it. It was especially the case with Victor, who was quite scared of what Lady Demiliore would do to him if Keith got injured again. The group were led inside an office, where an aged man in his late 50s, who was deceivingly fit for his age, stood up and came forward to greet Keith. "Welcome to my venue, young Master Demiliore." He smiled and greeted him in a gruff voice, and despite his sincere smile, everyone could see that he was not excited to meet Keith. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Guzzo." Keith smiled and shook hands with the man before he and Sebs took their seats at his desk. "The pleasure is all mine, but I am curious. To what do I owe this pleasure, young Demiliore?" Guzzo got straight to the point and asked. He was a seasoned man, a powerful man of great strength, but he was quite restless inside his heart because Keith had brought 4 people with him, 3 of whom were just as strong as him, if not more powerful. And his instincts were telling him that Keith did not have good intentions towards him. "We will get to that eventually." Keith chuckled and looked the old man in his dark eyes, which had lost their luster over time. "But first I would like to confirm something." "Please say." Guzzo interestedly raised his brow. "I learned about a story recently, and I would like to know how much of it is true." He devilishly smiled, and Guzzo felt his heart constrict for some reason. "Correct me if I got anything wrong." Seeing that he had all of Guzzo's attention and also that of all the people in the room, he began with his story. Years ago, there was an old man, a powerful man who held a prominent position in the military of his country. Everyone respected him and admired him for his work ethic. However, the old man hid a secret in his heart that probably no one knew. He did not really have any love for his country. Guzzo felt goosebumps all over his body just by hearing those words. However, he stayed silent and waited for Keith to continue with his story. When he finally took retirement after a disagreement over an operation that concerned a country where he was born, he secluded himself from the world, arriving inside a small town to live peacefully. One day, when he was walking past an orphanage, he came across a boy with dark eyes, which lacked the sparkle of innocence, and took a fancy to him, accepting him as his disciple for reasons only he knew. But I think that the reason he accepted the boy as his disciple was because they both shared the same heritage. Keith chuckled when he saw Guzzo narrowing his eyes at him. The old man raised his disciple with care and great effort, instilling into him his beliefs, and managed to get him into the army to continue his legacy. However, something terrible happened to the young man, and he was kicked out of the national forces because of a crime he committed. The life of a soldier was simply not suited for him. The old man was raged, mad about how his disciple had thrown away all his efforts and ruined his future, but the young man was not really bothered and left to prove himself to the old man. The young man arrived at a city called Delvon, which was at that time infested with underground forces. At first, the young man wanted to exorcise the city of this filth, but soon he found himself captivated by the allure and power of the underworld, and his goal changed. Now he wanted to rule the city. His dream was short-lived as he was handed his first defeat at the hands of a local mafia boss, who later invited him to become part of his organization. The young man accepted the offer and worked under the new boss, who had started considering him as a son. He made lots of friends and found people whom he could trust and call brothers. Things were going smoothly for him, but as the death of the old man neared, the fight for succession ensued. Much to the dismay of the once young man, who was now a man in his 40s, the boss nominated his biological son as his successor and asked him to protect his brother. He promised the old man that he would protect his brother, but inside his heart a devious plan took root. 3 days after the death of the boss, his successor was ambushed and killed right in the middle of a bustling street, and his corpse stayed unattended. The city was in chaos, and the middle-aged man stepped forward under the guise of avenging his late brother, eliminating all their enemies, when in truth, he was the one who had killed his brother. Such a devious man. Keith chuckled. He even accepted the wife of his brother as his wife, and raised his niece as his stepdaughter. Such an honorable man. He chuckled some more, as if mocking the man he was talking about. Guzzo's body was lightly trembling now, his face getting red in raging emotions. The man succeeded in his plans, achieved something that even his boss could never achieve in his life. He unified the underworld forces of Delvon and became its sole king. But unbeknownst to him, retribution was on its way at Novel Benedat. A few years later, one night, his wife mysteriously passed away, leaving his distraught and innocent stepdaughter in his arms. How could she have known that the man she was holding onto was not a hero that she adored in her heart, but the murderer of her parents? The innocent her eventually fell into his clutches, giving him what his heart now desired the most now. Her. But what goes around comes around. And just like he had betrayed his brother, one of his most trusted betrayed him, abducting his innocent stepdaughter, who was secretly his lover now. And for the first time in his life, the Mafia King of Delvon felt ridiculously weak. He found out that he had actually fallen in love with the girl, and his mind could not bear the thought of never seeing her again. Days later, when he knew that it was either she died or he died, he approached the old man who had raised him, falling onto his knees and begging him to help save the little girl. His master rebuffed him at first, but then decided to help him out. However, his happiness was to never return to him. A battle took place, where he managed to kill all his enemies, but suffered a grievous injury at a very delicate place, which left him infertile for the rest of his life. But it was not what hurt him the most, but that he had failed to save his love. His master left him drowning in his grief, and the king of Delvon even started hating the sight and smell of the city he was in. And so, he decided to leave the place and start a new life someplace else. For years he worked hard to a mostly clean life, established a flourishing business with his own ability, earning enough that he would never again have to touch the money stained by blood that he still had buried in the depths of the Delvon city. Time passed. The man grew weak as he did not have any desire to cultivate anymore. And over 2 decades later, all that has remained is a shadow of a man he once used to be. And now, he finally understands why his old boss had chosen his biological son over him. Because now, he could not have a child of his own. He realizes that it is a blessing that only a parent could ever comprehend the bliss of. How much he wishes he could have a family of his own, but the fate is ruthless. And one day, on just another normal day, a young man with his powerful guards arrived at his office, looking at him with a mischievous smile, telling him his own story, a story that should have been a secret. The former king of Delvon wanted nothing more than to shred the young man into pieces for ripping the scabs over his wounded heart. But unfortunately for him, it was someone even he did not dare to provoke. As soon as his words fell, his guards broke out of the trance and stood up, drawing their weapons. All of Guzzo's men were incapacitated in no time, and Sebastian had his desert eagle pointing right between the eyes of the old man. Ying was coldly looking at everyone, and it was clear from her expressions that one naive move would be akin to asking her to stain her blade in their blood. At ease, Keith lightly waved his hand, and Sebastian withdrew his pistol, but still stayed vigilant. Victor too calmed down. However, Ryuta and Ying kept their blades drawn. "What do you want, heir Demiliore?" Guzzo grimly asked, and his bloodshot eyes were glaring at him. The Melodona nightclub chain, the Helga's kitchen chain, Nightingale Auditorium and Opera House, the Golden Plaza, the Pacific Oriental, and all your private properties in Samran. In short, I want everything that you own in Samran, Keith said and smiled. I am even willing to offer a prize for your nearly 2 billion nearest business and properties in Samran. How about a 100 million nearest? He devilishly grinned. Even men much braver and far wiser than you have never dared to threaten me, young Demiliore. Guzzo madly cackled. You are provoking an enemy who has nothing to lose. He was confident that Keith would not kill him here. Even the all-powerful families of Samran could not blatantly kill someone so openly. Oh, you are right. Keith feigned surprise. Well, then that means that we just have to give you something that you can't afford to lose. Isn't that right? He chuckled and gestured to Sebastian, who opened the briefcase and handed Guzzo an envelope. The old man curiously opened the envelope and took out the photos that were inside it. Silence reigned in the office as everyone watched Guzzo's ever-changing reactions. In the end, his body was trembling uncontrollably, But it was not enraged this time, as his eyes that had been dry for years were shedding tears of pain as he stared at the image of a middle-aged woman in her mid-40s, holding a little baby in her arms, surrounded by what looked like her family. Your stepdaughter Mallory goes by a new name now. Allison Baker, wife to a white-collar worker and mother to a young man and a younger daughter. She recently became a grandmother. Keith brightly smiled at him. Is it really her? Guzzo asked in a pained voice, and heard Keith laughing lightly. The laugh sounded like a devil's HYMM to their ears, enchanting yet sending chills up their spines. You have already recognized her, old man. Do you still need my word for it? Keith smirked. But she won't be enough of a leverage over you, right? After all, she has been touched by another man, her womb has been sullied by another seed, and you will most likely kill her and her family now that you know she has been alive all these years. He looked him right into his eyes and laughed. However, first, you want some answers from her. Isn't that right? Fear whispered in the heart of Guzzo for the first time today. He was horrified at the fact that this young man could read him as if he was an open book. Even his master had never been able to read his train of thoughts so well. I can give you the answers you need, but that shouldn't be your priority, Keith lightly said, getting the old man's attention. What is it? He apprehensively asked. You should take a look at the young man in the images once again. Her son looks a lot like you, doesn't he? His words detonated in the mind of Guzzo, blanking it, and the photographs in his hand dropped on the floor without him taking another look at them. It was the manager, Trevor, who regained his composure first and gathered the images from the floor, taking a good look at them. Doesn't he bear an uncanny resemblance to your boss, Manager Trevor? Keith asked with a smile, and his words brought Guzzo out of his trance. It can't be, he shouted and snatched the photos from his subordinate's hand, taking a look at them again, and the more he looked at the face of the young man in the photos, the more he felt weak in his knees, eventually plopping back into his seat. I don't have a reason to fool you. A simple DNA test will prove it to you. He is indeed your only child, and congratulations. You have become a grandfather now. Keith cheerfully said and clapped lightly before his smile ceased. Now, do I have enough of a leverage over you, Mr. Guzzo? Guzzo stayed silent at his question and was still lost in his thoughts. Who betrayed me? He eventually asked, and no one except for Keith understood his question. Your master. Keith simply said, You jest. Guzzo shot up on his feet, shouting at him, and Keith's eyes turned cold. A chilling silence reigned in the room, and Guzzo couldn't keep staring in those haunting brown eyes that were looking back at him in a silent warning. It was your master, Keith said again when Guzzo sat back in his seat. And if you doubt it, why don't you go and confront him? I have heard that he is a blunt man who disdains lying. Why would he do it? Guzzo gritted his teeth and asked. I begged him to save her, told him that she meant everything to me. I even forgave him when he failed to save her. Then why? He was becoming hysterical now. Perhaps he just wanted to save an innocent girl from your clutches. Or perhaps he had something else in his mind, a plan for you. But he isn't really a devious man, is he? Keith smiled at him. Oh, and your master accepted another disciple 15 years ago. His name is Yi Tian, and he was once an orphan in the Delvon City Orphanage. Guzzo frowned at his words. He had heard from his master that he had a junior brother now, but he could discern an underlying meaning in Keith's words. Now, shall we discuss business? Keith smiled at him. Since I have given you the information that has changed your life for the better, you owe me a favor. Guzzo frowned at the sudden change in Keith's tone. It was no longer a threat and a talk about leverages, but a talk about favors. However, Guzzo knew better than to fall for it. At it, novel Benedat. You want my business and properties in Samran, which all of your major famils have been coveting for years now. If I show my willingness to sell them, I can make over 3 billion liras. And you have so far only offered me a 100 million. He seriously said, and that's my final offer, Mr. Guzzo. He smiled and said, we both know you are a rich man. You don't lack money, and Delvon is still your home ground if you return to it. What's a mere 3 billion liras to you? He chuckled. It may not be a lot in your eyes, young Demiliore, but it is a lot to me. Guzzo seriously said, let's not play around, Mr. Guzzo. I won't raise my offer. Keith shook his head. How about I give you a promise that will free you off your worries? Sell your business to me, and I won't harm you or your family. He straightforwardly said, I can also promise you to protect your family in the future in case something unexpected happens to you. Gozer surprisingly looked at him and once again felt that Keith had an underlying meaning behind his words. Give him the papers. Sebastian listened to his words and handed the papers that he had prepared earlier in the morning. Time passed, and Guzzo kept staring at the papers placed in front of him, and Keith waited patiently. Finally, the old man picked up the pen and started signing the documents. 3 billion liras was a huge sum, but his wealth was many times that. He could afford to lose such a sum. A wise decision, Mr. Guzzo. Keith smiled at him. Since you have shown your goodwill, I would like to save you from staining your hands in an innocent's blood. Don't kill Demiliore. Why? Guzzo narrowed his eyes and asked. She does not remember you. Keith told him. She lost her memories all those years ago, and there is little to no hope that she will ever recover them. His words caused Guzzo's breath to grow agitated, and some hope sparkled in his eyes. Yes, it means that she also does not remember what the traitor informed her about. He lightly smiled and said, and you don't need to ask your master for the truth of the matter, too. You can simply investigate the procedure behind her new official identity, and you will learn the truth yourself. After Sebastian went through the papers and checked that everything was in order, Keith stood up from his seat. It was nice doing business with you, Mr. Guzzo. Demiliore and your son are residents of Greedwood Town in the Kilvorsa province. He shook his hands with Guzzo and said, My company will take charge of your businesses on Monday. Have a nice evening. Keith walked out of the office followed by his guards, leaving Guzzo lost in his thoughts. Your orders, boss? Trevor grimly asked. He is not someone we can provoke, Trevor. Guzzo shook his head and narrowed his eyes. Kill her husband. Make it seem like an accident. Yes. Trevor understood what his boss was talking about and left the room to make preparations. Outside the Melodona Prime, inside the luxurious Rolls-Royce Phantom, Sebastian finally could not contain his awe and curiosity. You have done something that all the major families could not do in over a decade. He laughed and said, I told you. Everyone has a weakness that can be exploited. Keith lightly chuckled. I will be putting you in charge of the Black Forest Leisure and Entertainment Company. All this business will be under your supervision. He informed him. I will take care of it to the best of my ability, young master. I expect nothing less from you. He smiled and nodded. Master, how did Demiliore survive all those years ago? Enine curiously asked. They never intended to kill her. Those that had betrayed Guzzo were her biological father's loyal men who had stayed hidden by Guzzo's side. She was informed of Guzzo's truth and taken to a safe place. However, when she learned of the news that she was pregnant, she tried to commit suicide by jumping into a river, but she was saved by Guzzo's master. And her memory loss? Sebastian asked. Partially caused by her stress and the injury she suffered as a result of falling headfirst into the water from a good height, and then Guzzo's master did the rest by meticulously using his aura to worsen it. He revealed to them, did that old man really save her out of goodwill? Sebastian frowned and asked, Who knows? Keith simply shrugged, and both Sebs and Enine glanced at him. They could feel that he knew that truth behind that too, but was not willing to tell them about it. Keith rested his head back and turned his face to the window, looking at the city as they passed through it. There was a light smile on his face that only he knew the reason behind. Guzzo, the former king of Delvon, senior brother of Etion, was meant to be his foothold in Samran and Delvon, and now he was gone. He wondered how Etion would fare now that he would not have Guzzo's support this time, and neither the opportunity to swallow the old man's business and network. Keith knew that Guzzo would still suffer the same fate and die at the hands of Etion after killing their master. But this time, Etion would gain nothing out of it. If he had not informed Guzzo about the existence of his family, it would have been Etion who would have informed him about it to gain his goodwill, just according to the plan of their master. But every ring was foiled now, and he could not wait to see what results it would yield. His deep brown eyes fluttered open, and he sat up on his bed, yawning, to wake up his bodily functions from sleep. He then stretched out his arms and back, and leaned back, supporting himself on his arms. His eyes drifted towards the clock on the wall, and he sighed as he realized that it was almost noon. He had pulled another long night last night, and it wasn't a night of passion this time. Rather, he and Amelia had been busy working. She had her projects to complete, and he had decided to play around on the stock market after spending another $100 million yesterday, which had left him with only a little over $20 million in his account. And now, after burning the midnight oil, he had an additional $10 million to play with. If he was being honest, he was mostly doing it for he found it fun. It was quite an addictive game. Keith opened the drawer of the side table and took out a digital watch from it. He dialed the first contact, and as soon as the call was picked up, he gave his command. "Get me something light to eat, and tell Enying that she will be accompanying me on a run." "Yes, young master." Viola nodded to his words. "I will bring you your breakfast in 15 minutes. Make it 20 minutes. I need to freshen up." "And thank you." Keith nodded and ended the call. Even if she was no longer his personal maid, but served Amelia now, he was used to seeking her for his daily needs. And he was not going to drop this habit anytime soon. Keith placed the watch on the side table and walked into the dressing room to pick up his clothes and then entered the bathroom to freshen up. He returned to his room after 25 minutes and found Enying sitting at the breakfast table, waiting for him. "Good morning." He cheerfully greeted her and planted a kiss on her cheek before taking a seat by her side. "Good afternoon, master." She greeted him back, which prompted him to chuckle at her words. "Eat," he commanded, and then proceeded to pour her some soup and serve her some baked eggs and sausages. Viola always knew what he preferred in his meals, and as always, she made it herself for him. It was a delicious breakfast, and Keith enjoyed it in silence, not paying much attention to his companion, who was just as quiet. "Where's Amelia?" he asked after he wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Lady Amelia and Lady Kiera are with your mother. They should be in her room right now." She informed him. "Kiera's here?" he subsidely asked. Lady Kiera and Benjamin Angelini came early in the morning. After Lady Amelia informed the family that you had stayed up late, it was decided that you should not be disturbed. "Where's Ben?" he asked. "In the second lounge. He is playing around with Milo and Minami, and Viola is there to keep an eye on them." Keith nodded to her and then stood up. "Did Caesar make the arrangements?" he lightly asked. "Yes. As soon as Guzzo decides to do something unfavorable to you, you will be eliminated," she coldly said. "I hope he lives for a while." He coldly smiled. "There is something really important that I need him to do." Enying stayed silent to his words. It was not her place to inquire about his plans. She was just relieved in her heart that her master did not trust a man like Guzzo. "Let's go." He picked the watch and wore it before walking out of the room together with her. A maid had been waiting in the hallway, and as soon as he passed her, she walked into his room to clean it up. Ever since the day he had woken up from that nightmare, he had not exercised and had never got the chance to test his physical endurance. Well, except for in bed, but it was not the right indicator of his physical capabilities. "Want to race me?" He smirked at her after he set the running mode on his watch. Enying glanced at him and then nodded indifferently. "Go," he called out, and both of them shot off. Yes, he was fast, much faster than before, but against Enying, he was still too slow. After 500 meters, he simply gave up on catching up to her and slowed down. She sensed it and lowered her pace too, allowing him to catch up with her. "You should at least let your master win against you," he complained. "Do you want to go easy on you?" she flatly asked. "No," he chuckled and shook his head. They both kept running at the same pace for over an hour, going around the Demiliore estate, and then Keith finally felt the fatigue kicking in as he decided to lead her back to the manor. Enying was curiously looking at him, panting heavily, sitting on the steps in front of the manor. "What?" he finally asked after his heart calmed down a little. "You have far more stamina than a normal auror in the nascent, profound realm," she remarked. "Is that so?" He curiously looked at her and saw her nod to him. 29.7 miles in 1h in 26 minutes. He looked at the data on the watch and nodded to himself. "Not bad. It's much faster than those professional marathon runners, and much faster than people even in the late nascent, profound realm." Enying told him again that his speed and endurance were abnormal. "It should be because I take good care of my sex life." He nodded to himself. I'm not like some frustrated virgins in their mid-20s who do not know how blissful and healthy it is. He took a jab at her. Are you taking about your bride-to-be? Her reply to his jab surprised him, and he looked her in the eyes, smiling brightly. Oops, did I hit a nerve? He teased her again. Ying narrowed her eyes at him, and then looked away, not bothering with his words. Come here. He stood up and pulled her by the hand, pressed her against the cold pillar, and leaned in. You know, I could fix it for you. He mischievously whispered near her ear before softly kissing her cheek and helping her stand on top of his feet to make up for the difference in their heights. At it novel been at. He kept planting kiss on her jawbone, and her body trembled to the touch of his lips, making him smile heartily. Tell me, Ying, has my lovely shadow ever touched herself down there? He asked and squeezed her left boob in his hand, which was a perfect fit. Yes. He asked again, planting a kiss right under her ear. Her body was squirming now, and he could feel her anxious heartbeat. Yes. He asked again and lightly nibbled on her earlobe, making her gasp and clutch on his shirt tightly. I guess it is a yes. No. She nearly shouted the answer, and then burned in a blush, trying to hide her face from his eyes. No. He feigned surprise and pulled back a little, scrutinizing her. Ying's heartbeat quickened under his gaze, and then she timidly shook her head, confirming her earlier answer. On. He chuckled and leaned in, capturing her lips with his, and to her anguish, his brazen hand sneaked under her sweatshirt and started playing with her left mount. You taste just like cherries, my dear shadow. He smiled between the kisses and informed her. I love it. He really wanted to free her soft pair of boobs from the confines of the sports bra, but decided against it and kept playing them from over the cloth. How fun it would be if someone shows up right now and catches us in this state. He chuckled and nibbled on her lower lip. Master, please. Her light brown eyes turned misty as she asked him to stop. Why? He grinned and then sneaked his left hand inside her sweatpants, into her underwear, placing it right on top her tight bubble ass, which was a delight to squeeze. Not here. She managed so say those words before he caught her in another kiss. Then where? He teasingly asked, but before he could get an answer, she lightly pushed him away. A couple of maids walked out of the manor and respectfully bowed to him before heading towards their quarters. And Ying grasped this opportunity to tidy up her clothes and get a hold on her emotions. However, when she saw him approach her again, her heart betrayed her. You haven't answered me yet, dear Ying. He placed his hands on the pillar on either side of her head, blocking her routes to escape. Kiss me, he commanded. Ying trembled under his command, but her body moved on its own, tiptoeing and catching his worn lips that she so desired ever since he had stolen her first kiss. Say you love me, he asserted, and she yielded in, fearing that if she did not say it, he would never kiss her again. I love you. She burned a furious blush and meekly said. Again, he smiled near her ear and demanded. I love you. This time she mustered up enough courage to say it clearly. Good girl. He chuckled and planted a kiss on her neck. You are precious to me, Ying, my beautiful shadow. He smiled and said before setting her free and walking inside the manor. There was a fond smile on his lips now, and his mood was great since he had managed to successfully tease his precious Ying, saving her expressions and words forever in his memory. Yay! Awesome! Kiera and Ben happily applauded for him when he finished playing another song for them. Thank you. He smiled at them. Let's start with your lesson now. No! Ben vehemently shook his head. You haven't played Carol of the Bells yet. It is Christmas time, and Carol of the Bells is a must. Ben's right. I want to listen to Carol of the Bells. Kiera supported her little cousin and cutely smiled at him. Keith sighed when he looked at their puppy eyes. They were still at it, and it had been nearly 2 hours now. The reason why Kiera and Ben came to his home was for his promised violin lesson on Sundays. They dragged him to the music room, and Vanessa and Amelia followed after them. But instead of asking him to teach them how to play, they requested him to play a piece of music for them. He did not really mind their request, as it was a good thing to give them a demonstration. And since Kiera and Amelia had never listened to him play violin before, he picked up a beautiful but tough piece of music, Meditation by Jules Massenet, to showcase his talent. Now that he reflected on everything that transpired, it was an unwise decision. He did get the response he was looking for, awe and surprise, but then he was barraged by Kiera to play more, and the other two ladies supported her requests. Nearly 2 hours and more than a dozen songs later, they were still requesting him to play some more songs. "You'll be back home for dinner, Ben. Just play one last song, and then you can start with your lesson." Vanessa interjected his words and helped the two youngsters out once again. "You two love Carol of the Bells, so just play it for us. You're really enjoying it, aren't you?" He complained at the playfulness in his mother's eyes and could not help but sigh when she started giggling. "I just love watching and listening you play. You can't blame me for how good you are." She smirked at him, earning another sigh from him. "This is the last song," he seriously said to his little sister and her cousin. "If you still continue to play around after it, I won't teach you how to play violin." "We understand." Kiera nodded her head. Ben was grinning happily, excited about his favorite piece of music that was about to be played. Keith placed the violin back on his collarbone, adjusted the right position, and then took a deep breath before closing his eyes and placing the bow on strings. Vanessa picked up the tablet and clicked on the background music for Carol of the Bells, and soon a beautiful melody of triangle, cello, and piano started playing inside the music room. The ladies were once more hooked by his serious look as he basked in the music. They looked at him with adoration, which he was oblivious of since he had a habit of closing his eyes whilst playing violin. If he could see them, he would have found a sparkle in their eyes, and even Amelia was looking at him as if she wanted to forever save his profile in the depths of her mind. When the time arrived, Keith finally started playing. The first note sounded out as perfect as it could be, and then a wondrous tune filled the room and shrouded the senses of the listeners. Vanessa was right. He too loved Carol of the Bells, and it was one of the first songs that he learned after he started playing violin. Over the years, he had perfected his performance, but even now, whenever he played it, he put all his focus on it trying to best his last performance. And that was the reason why he was so good at it. 3 minutes passed, the song ended, leaving the listeners yearning for more, but Keith did not give them a chance to put more requests. He took away the tablet from his mother's hand, switching off the music system. "Now, it's time for your lesson." He looked at the pair of cousins and said, "You are mean." Kiera pouted and complained, but still stood up and walked over to where her new violin was placed. "You are awesome, Keith." Ben happily ran up to him and hugged his waist. This was the best Carol of the Bells. "Thank you, young man. Now go on, get your violin so we can start with your lesson." He ruffled the boy's hair and ushered him away. "You guys have fun. I have some work to attend to," Vanessa announced and kissed Keith on the cheek before leaving the music room. "You are staying?" He smiled when he saw Amelia still sitting in her seat. The green-eyed girl smiled and nodded at him. "You can learn too." He invited her. "I will just watch for now." She shook her head at his suggestion. Keith just shrugged it off and then looked at the pair of cousins who were back with their violins. "Take your seat." He pointed at the stools, and the two obediently took their seats. Now, the first lesson is all about how to hold the violin and the bow. He walked over to them and then helped them both put their violins on their collarbones and place their left hands in the right position to hold onto the instruments. "Are you comfortable?" he inquired. "Feels weird, but it's fine." Kiera honestly spoke out, and her little cousin simply nodded his head to her words. "You will get used to it." He chuckled and then picked up his bow. "The end you hold is called the frog's end, and if you hold it wrong, you simply cannot play violin correctly." He proceeded to demonstrate how the bow should be held, and then showed then where it should be placed on the violin. Your bow must never leave the second lane, and what you have to work on is keeping it parallel to the bridge as you draw it. Keith demonstrated to them what he meant, and then asked them to draw the bow like he did. Both Kiera and Ben winced at the obnoxious sound that came out of their violins, prompting Keith to chuckle at their expressions. "Don't worry. You will learn with time about the weight and pressure that you must put through the bow against the strings. It is something that you can only work on through practice," he told them. "Now try again and again till I ask you to stop." To the displeasure of his students, he kept making them draw their bow in the right manner for nearly an hour, correcting them whenever they made a mistake. One of the reasons why it is recommended that children are taught violin from a young age is their hold on the bow. Ben is not feeling the same discomfort as you because his wrists are softer when compared to yours. He informed Kiera, who was a little depressed at finding Ben making better progress than her. But now you know how it's done properly, so we can proceed to the notes. Adet novel Benedet. He informed them about the strings, G, D, A, and E, and then he informed them about each natural note on the fingerboard. The D note on the G string will sound exactly the same as the open D. The notes on the D string are E, F, G, and A. The A note on the D string will sound exactly the same as the open A on the A string. He informed them of the theory first, and then made them play each note on each string over and over again. Both Kiera and Ben had to work hard to make sure that the last note on each string sounded the same as the open note on the next string. It was because they were still working on catching the right position on the fingerboard when playing he notes. Keith was really patient with them, guiding them whenever they needed help, but what amused Amelia the most was how strict he was in his lessons. He did not cater to any complaints the two youngsters made, and kept making them play over and over again until they got hold of the natural notes and their right positions. Violin is not fun. Ben was nearly on the verge of crying when the lesson finished, his little body aching from all the work. Is that so? He chuckled and ruffled his hair. Did you think that you could just learn it all in one day and start playing like your mother in no time at all? No, but I didn't know it was going to be so hard to learn. The little boy pouted and folded his arms on his chest. You did well in your lesson today, Ben. Keith encouragingly said, keep working hard, and you will appreciate your hard work one day. What's the next lesson going to be about? Kiera asked after she packed her violin back inside the case. We will be revising the natural notes next weekend, and if I see that you two have improved, I might teach you about the sharps and the flats. He knew that she planned on preparing for their next lesson in advance. Do not try playing sharps and flats yet. You must improve on your natural notes first. He seriously advised her. We won't. Kiera promised him with a smile. Good. He chuckled and then checked his watch. It's too early for dinner, so how about a light supper? We will eat in the city and then I will drop you back home. He suggested, much to the pleasure of the two of them. Yes. They both responded in unison, no longer depressed about their first violin lesson. Keith. The girl in her pajamas nearly screamed when she found him standing outside the door of her apartment. Good evening, Nana. He smiled at her. May I come inside? Who is it, Nana? A feminine voice sounded out from inside the apartment, and Nana immediately stepped aside, welcoming Keith inside her home. Good evening, Auntie. Keith brightly smiled at the middle-aged woman, who looked a lot better than the last time he saw her at the hospital. Dolores was surprised to see who it was, and after a brief frown, she immediately stood up from the couch and brightly smiled back at him. Welcome to our home, Keith. She approached him and said, You should have informed us beforehand, so I would have prepared something sumptuous for dinner. It's all right, Auntie. He chuckled and shook his head. I just had supper, and anything will do for the dinner. It's salmon and seafood stew. She informed him. I will be more than happy with that. He smiled when she saw him curiously looking at the shopping bags in his hands. I was hoping to stay overnight. And here. He forwarded her a bag. This is for you. You have already done more than enough for us, Keith. She was hesitant to accept his gift. These are just supplements and a few ingredients for the recipe that is inside. It's a soup that you must take every morning for better health. His words eased her nerves, and she felt a lot better in her heart. Thank you. She smiled at him, and then severely looked at her shy daughter, who had her head lowered. What are you doing? Go, help him with his stuff in your room. Sorry, Nana yelped, and then hurriedly accepted the shopping bags from Keith's hands before rushing inside her room. Forgive her for being so clumsy. Dolores apologized to him for her daughter's neglectfulness. It's nothing to fret over, Auntie. He laughed it off and then apologized to her. Sorry for coming uninvited. You are welcome here anytime you want. She hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed him by the arm, leading him to the lounge. Sit. I will bring you some tea. I don't drink tea. Coffee. Not in the mood. Just a glass of water will be fine. It won't do. She shook her head and started walking towards the kitchen. I will bring you some green tea with honey and lemon. It will be good before dinner. Keith sighed at her enthusiasm and shook his head helplessly. He could feel that Dolores had learned about his identity, and she was a little apprehensive of him. It was a good thing that he decided to come tonight to ease her worries. Otherwise, the news that will be circulating in the city in the coming days would have made her even more anxious. Nana returned after a few minutes and shyly sat by his side, not daring to look at him. He could see that she had just washed her face and tied her hair up to make her look more presentable to him. It was cute even if she did not really need to do it. Her clumsiness had a charm to itself that was quite an allure. "Did you prepare for tomorrow's party?" He smiled and asked. "Yes." She nodded her head seriously. "Aunt May helped me out, and everything has been arranged for 4 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. The invitations, all sent and delivered." She nodded again. "Good job." He appreciatively nodded, which brought a delighted smile to her lips. "How was your day?" "Busy." She sighed but then smiled again. "I finished all of my assignments for winter holidays. I haven't even checked them yet." He chuckled and shook his head. "How was your day?" "Woke up late, went for a run, and then spent the entire afternoon with family." He told her, and then turned towards Dolores, who was coming out of the kitchen, holding his tea. Nana did not want to be scolded again and immediately stood up, helping her mother. "Thank you." He accepted the tea and then tasted it under the hopeful eyes of the mother and daughter. "It's pleasant," he truthfully said. Even though he did not like tea, he did occasionally drink green tea, and Dolores had made it as perfect as it could be. "Thank you." She happily smiled. "Keep him company. I will take care of the dinner." Nana nodded her head obediently. "Go help your mother. I will be fine," he seriously said, and the young lady sweetly smiled at him before nodding her head obediently. It was just these little things that people appreciated about others, and it made them feel a lot more comfortable about their presence in their lives. And Dolores felt her worries easing some more. The Smiths set up the dinner table in the next 30 minutes, and Keith passed the time going through some news about the current affairs of the world. "It's delicious." Keith tasted the stew first and nodded appreciatively. "I'm glad you like it." Dolores smiled and then plated salmon and some mashed potatoes for him. Even though he was not really hungry, he did not refuse anything that they plated for him. "This place is a little too big for us, Keith," Dolores said towards the end of the meal. "Nana could have stayed with you, and the old place was more than big enough for me." Her words were casual, but Keith picked up on what she was really worried about. "I will eventually take her away from you one day, but she needs to stay with you for some time. It would be for the best if she can learn to cook as good as you do." He chuckled and proceeded to finish his meal. His answer was just as casual as her unvoiced question, and Dolores was a little more relieved in her heart that he was not just playing around with her daughter. There were a lot of things that she wanted to talk about, but she knew that it would put her daughter in an awkward position or, at worst, could jeopardize the relationship between the two of them. So, she kept her worries and questions in her heart, hoping and praying that everything will turn out for the best. "Nana told me that you got your old job back," he suddenly said, and Nana, who had not told him anything about it, curiously looked at him, not saying anything to contradict his words. "Yes." Dolores nodded to him. "I will be joining Beacon Hills High School again as an English professor. Are you happy about it?" he seriously asked. "I am." She nodded again. "I have taught there for 15 years, and if it was not for this job, I can't imagine what would have happened to the two of us after my husband abandoned us. It was quite painful when I had to resign due to my worsening health, and now that I'm all better, I want to continue teaching there." Keith nodded to her words, not commenting on her decision, and Nana was a little depressed that her hateful father had been brought in their talk. Keith chatted with Dolores for quite some time, telling her about his family and assuring her about the workplace. Nana's mood eventually brightened up once again, and an hour later, under the forcing of her mother, she led Keith to her room. As soon as she locked the door, Keith wrapped his arms around her from behind, softly caressing her belly. He nuzzled his face in her head, inhaling her scent, and then started taking off her clothes. "Turn around," he said as soon as he bared her upper body to his eyes. Keith chuckled when he found her trying to hide from his eyes, covering her breasts with her folded arms. "It's not like I haven't already seen every inch of your body." He teased her and saw a rosy blush spread across her skin. Take your arms off your chest. He stepped back and commanded her. Nana complied with his command, albeit with a little hesitance, and trembled when she heard his next words. Now off with your bottoms. Keith. She was really embarrassed by his words and could feel his heated gaze running over every inch of her bare body. She mustered up some courage and then loosened her pajamas before taking them off, leaving herself only in a boy-short underwear. Keith stayed silent and kept running his eyes over her body, not speaking, making her more restless and a little insecure. Nana could no longer bear with the silence and looked up at him and tried to walk into his arms. But Keith pushed her back, pinning her against the cold wooden door. He was an entire foot taller than her in height, and she apprehensively looked at him when he leaned in and stole a light kiss from her lips. Stay still. He mischievously grinned at her, and then sneaked his hand inside her underwear, caressing her shaved mound and the puffy nether lips. I said, stay still. He reminded her again as her body suddenly jolted against his touch. He softly rubbed her folds before eventually settling on the top end of them, where her clitoris was hidden. And then he became aggressive, making her squirm more. At it, novel been at. Keep looking into my eyes. He pulled her by the chin when she tried to look away. Tell me, did you miss my touch? His unfair question heightened the sensations that were spreading in her lower body, and her heart started pounding in affright. Did you? Nana nodded her head and tried to look away, but he pulled her by the chin again, forcing her to keep looking at his handsome face. And did you comfort yourself like I am helping you now? He said, and then tried to pinch her clit. Ah! She moaned, and her body instinctively tried to escape from his clothes, but unfortunately for her, there was no escape. Did you? He asked as he sneaked his middle finger inside of her, playing with her folds that were getting wetter with every passing second. Yes. She gasped for breath and honestly answered him. Really? He mischievously chuckled and leaned near her ear. Did it feel just as good as it does now? No, she subconsciously replied and tried to kiss him, but he pulled away from her face in time. Don't be hasty, he said, and started pumping his finger in and out of her. Keith savored every moment of Nana trying to yearn for more and stay in her place. But eventually, she could not hold on and grabbed onto his shirt, burying her face in his chest, muffling her moans there. Her warm and soft insides tried to milk his finger as he helped her to an orgasm, and then Keith pulled out of her, letting her juices soak her underwear. You did not stay still, my dear. He devilishly chuckled. It's punishment time. Nana's body trembled at his words, and she furiously blushed when he guided her hand to his waist, making her feel his hardness. She was smart enough to understand what he wanted and started undressing him, which he allowed her to do. She took off his shirt first, planting a kiss on his sculpted chest, and then knelt down to help him take off his shoes and trousers. His members sprang into freedom when she finally took off his boxers, and Nana gulped apprehensively, wondering how it ever managed to fit inside of her. She was about to stand up, but Keith pressed on her head, keeping her on her knees, and then brought the glands against her lips. You must get it ready, or it will hurt you. He grinned at her in a warning. She was a naive girl, but not naive enough to not know what oral sex was. Her eyes shied away, but her soft lips started by planting a kiss on his glands, before proceeding to plant such kisses along his entire length. Lick it. He guided her since she had no prior experience with it, and when she coated his entire length in her saliva, he made her open her mouth to introduce himself better to her tongue. Keith guided her movements, instructed her on how to use her tongue, and kept himself under control. A part of him really wanted to explore the depths of her throat, but he knew that he was too big and it would hurt her pretty badly, and so he kept the urge under a leash. Perhaps another time. That's enough. He stopped her and pulled her back on her feet. I think we are ready for your punishment. Nana was bewildered when he suddenly turned her around and made her bend over. Place your hands on the door. He pulled her feet apart and adjusted her ass in a he-right position. Don't take your hands off it. Her body trembled when he yanked off her soaked underwear, leaving it stretched on her things. She knew what was about to come, and when he eased his glands inside of her, her breath got caught in her throat. However, he helped her breathe again when he suddenly thrust it inside of her, filling her to the brim. It was a good thing that she was wet, and she had readied him too, otherwise it would have really hurt her badly. Keith appreciated the sight of him inside of her, and clawed on her ass, giving her time to adjust. Her insides could not accommodate all of him, and he knew that he had to work on her to make more space for him. When Nana's breathing finally calmed down, he started moving, mounting her in strong, deep thrusts that weakened her legs and sent jolts of pleasures through her body. Keith supported her by her ass and kept pounding inside of her as hard as he desired, and Nana had to muffle her moans by covering her mouth with her hand. Her insides expanded some more, making more room for him, and eventually reached their limits, failing to take all of him inside of her. Nana suffered from one orgasm after another, and the position rendered her completely at the mercy of Keith, who ruthlessly kept pounding inside of her until she started feeling dizzy due to the unbearable pleasure she was experiencing. Keith finally came inside of her, painted her womb in with his essence, and then grinned as he pulled out of her, letting their juices drip onto the underwear that was still stretched on her things. "No more," Nana hoarsely whispered with her half-lidded eyes when Keith pulled her underwear off and carried her in his arms to the bed. "Oh no, silly girl. You failed to keep your hands on the door." He evilly smiled. "You need to be punished some more." Her misty eyes shot wide open at his words in fear and in anticipation, and tremors speared across her lower body.